What if the darkest corners of our psyche don't hide an enemy, but a key to our wholeness? What if fears, dreams, coincidences, and even inner contradictions aren't chaos at all, but messages we stubbornly ignore? Carl Jung argued that within us live opposites, shadows, and symbols we try to suppress. Yet they are the very source of true strength. Uncomfortable questions, strange dream images, coincidences that defy logic, all of these are part of a dialogue with the unconscious. In this video, we'll explore why inner conflict doesn't have to lead to destruction, but can open the door to transformation. You'll discover how creative tension and the encounter with your own shadow can become the starting point for a new life. Stay with us until the end, and you may uncover powers within yourself that have been hiding for years behind the mask of everyday life. Part 1. The Persona. The persona represents the external identity or social facade that individuals construct to meet societal and professional expectations. Carl Jung borrowed the term from the masks worn in classical Greek theater, using it to emphasize that the persona serves a functional and even necessary purpose, not simply one of artifice or deceit. Human beings naturally adopt different personas to fit the various roles they inhabit, such as being a parent, co-worker, friend, or community participant. The ability to shift between these roles and adapt behavior to context is a key social skill. However, challenges arise when people either become overly identified with these outward roles or when a profound gap forms between the face they show the world and their internal experience. The development of the persona begins in childhood, as young individuals start shaping their behavior to align with the expectations of caregivers and the broader community. Early on, children learn that certain characteristics earn praise, while others result in disapproval or exclusion. This pattern encourages them to emphasize the traits that garner acceptance and to suppress those that provoke criticism. As people move through school and enter the professional world, their personas become increasingly refined. These institutions tend to reward particular behaviors, thought patterns, and abilities, often discouraging or sidelining others. Over time, individuals may become so skilled at projecting a favorable image that they lose touch with their genuine emotions, longings, and instincts. Jung believed that true development of the persona involves a careful balancing act, responding to the demands of society without abandoning one's authentic self. A well-formed persona enables individuals to carry out their social and occupational duties while preserving their uniqueness and inner integrity. But when this outward identity becomes too fixed, exaggerated, or dominant, it can become a kind of psychological confinement. Rather than fostering meaningful relationships or deeper self-awareness, it may obstruct them. Maintaining an idealized image can become exhausting, and in striving for acceptance or recognition, a person may grow increasingly distant from their inner world. Midlife often serves as a critical juncture where long-held personas begin to lose their effectiveness. People may come to realize that their achievements, no matter how outwardly impressive, have not delivered lasting satisfaction. A high-performing professional might feel a deep sense of hollowness despite receiving praise and rewards, while a committed caregiver may feel disoriented or lost once their role is no longer needed. Though such realizations can be unsettling, they often signal a shift toward more genuine ways of living. Jung viewed these life transitions not as breakdowns, but as important opportunities for psychological evolution. They call on individuals to reclaim parts of themselves that were previously neglected or suppressed in the quest for success and approval. A central aspect of mature persona development lies in maintaining awareness that one's social roles are just that, roles, and not the totality of who they are. To remain psychologically resilient, people must be able to move in and out of their various social identities with ease without becoming overly entangled in any one of them. This capacity depends on what Jung called ego strength, the inner stability that allows a person to stay anchored in their core self even as external roles and expectations change. When the persona acts as a channel for the authentic self rather than a substitute for it, individuals are able to engage with the world in meaningful ways while remaining grounded in their personal values and truth. Part 2. Parental Archetypes. Parental archetypes are fundamental psychological patterns that embody nurturing, authority, and guidance, shaping human development from infancy through the entirety of adult life. According to Carl Jung, every individual carries within their unconscious mind the universal imagery of a great mother and a great father, symbols that extend far beyond the influence of one's actual parents. These archetypes deeply inform our perceptions of care, discipline, protection, and leadership. Their influence reaches beyond childhood and extends into relationships with mentors, educators, employers, and spiritual leaders. Understanding these symbolic figures can help explain why certain authority figures evoke strong emotional reactions and why conflicts around parenting often tap into deep-seated psychological struggles. The Great Mother archetype encapsulates the dual facets of maternal influence, both nurturing and destructive. In her positive form, she represents unconditional love, emotional nourishment, creative potential, and a deep attunement to nature's rhythms and intuitive knowing. She cultivates emotional security, encourages self-exploration and growth, and provides comfort during times of upheaval or transformation. However, this archetype also possesses a darker dimension. When it becomes distorted, the Great Mother can turn overprotective, smothering, and controlling, impeding independence and obstructing the healthy movement toward self-reliance and maturity. Conversely, the Great Father archetype signifies protective power and authoritative structure. In his benevolent expression, he embodies moral clarity, reliability, direction, and the ability to provide order and purpose. This archetypal father figure builds confidence, imparts essential life lessons, and serves as a role model for navigating societal structures and cultural expectations. Yet, like the maternal counterpart, the paternal archetype contains a shadow side. When corrupted, it emerges as oppressive, excessively critical, and rigidly authoritarian, resorting to fear and punishment rather than fostering development through compassion and understanding. Jung observed that when real-life parents fail to embody the constructive qualities of these archetypes, or when they over-identify with their destructive aspects, individuals may form what he called parental complexes. A maternal complex may manifest as emotional dependency, a reluctance to take personal responsibility, and a persistent search for surrogate maternal figures to provide comfort and security. A paternal complex, in contrast, may result in either extreme rebellion against all forms of authority or an over-compliant nature that suppresses autonomy and personal agency. These unconscious imprints can endure well into adulthood, subtly guiding relationship patterns, career decisions, and significant life choices. They often remain active until they are brought into conscious awareness and consciously addressed through psychological work. Jung believed that personal healing involves developing what he referred to as the inner parent, an internalized source of care, structure, guidance, and support that compensates for unmet needs from childhood. This inner function draws on the healthy traits of both the maternal and paternal archetypes, transcending gender, and serves as a cornerstone for inner stability and resilience. As individuals cultivate this internal parental presence, they become capable of offering meaningful support to others without falling into cycles of control or dependence. Likewise, they learn to receive care without compromising their individuality. This integration process paves the way for breaking intergenerational patterns and nurturing healthier, more conscious relationships, both within the family and with the younger generation more broadly. Part 3. The Hero's Journey and the Child Archetype. The hero archetype remains one of the most powerful and universally meaningful frameworks for understanding personal transformation and psychological growth. Carl Jung noted that heroic myths from cultures around the world share remarkably similar patterns, suggesting that their origins lie not just in tradition or storytelling, but in deep archetypal structures embedded within the collective unconscious. At the core of this archetype is the hero's journey, a timeless narrative that begins with a departure from familiar life, proceeds through trials and tribulations, often aided by mentors or guides, and culminates in a return home, fundamentally changed and bearing wisdom or gifts for the greater good. This symbolic progression mirrors the process of individuation, offering a map for navigating internal conflicts and the search for a more authentic self. The psychological journey typically begins with what Jung called the call to adventure, a disruption that shatters ordinary life and forces the individual to confront new challenges. This call may stem from external circumstances, such as job loss, illness, or a breakup, or arise from an internal discontent that signals the need for change and growth. At first, the call is frequently resisted. People often cling to the safety of the known, striving to maintain their current identities and routines. Yet over time, the need for transformation grows too strong to ignore. Accepting the call takes courage, as it demands leaving behind old habits and venturing into the unknown, where familiar defenses may no longer work. A vital component of this journey is the child archetype, which represents the pure, imaginative, and spontaneous aspects of the self, qualities often buried under the weight of adulthood and societal pressures. Jung identified multiple forms of the child archetype, such as the divine child, symbolizing inherent potential and spiritual awakening, and the wounded child, which reflects early emotional wounds and psychological limitations carried into adult life. This archetype embodies a deep reservoir of resilience, wonder, and creative insight, traits that often diminish as people pursue logic, order, and social success. Reconnecting with the inner child is essential for nurturing creativity, emotional depth, and hope, especially in times of upheaval or transformation. A central theme in the hero's journey is the relationship between the mature self and the child within. The hero must learn to honor and safeguard this inner child while also developing the strength, discipline, and competence required to meet the demands of adulthood. Problems arise when individuals overly identify with the child's need to avoid responsibility, or, on the other hand, when they suppress all childlike qualities in favor of rigid control and seriousness. Genuine psychological development comes from integrating these seemingly opposite forces, combining the child's openness and playfulness with the adult's stability and responsibility. This balance fosters a mature and adaptable personality, one capable of finding joy and creativity while also managing life's difficulties with wisdom and resilience. When this harmony is achieved, individuals are better prepared to face adversity with renewed clarity and emotional insight, rather than falling into despair or burnout. Jung emphasized that the hero's journey is not a one-time event, but a repeating cycle that accompanies each significant life transition. Whether it's entering adulthood, forming relationships, becoming a parent, changing careers, or facing aging, each stage calls for the shedding of an old identity and the emergence of new traits aligned with the next phase. Viewing these shifts as part of an archetypal process helps individuals see their struggles not as personal shortcomings, but as shared elements of the human condition. Ultimately, recognizing the structure of the hero's journey can bring comfort during difficult times. It suggests that even the most painful experiences may serve a greater role in our unfolding growth. No matter where someone begins or what they endure, the potential for renewal, insight, and transformation remains ever present. Part 4. Trickster, Magician, and Cultural Archetypes. The trickster is one of humanity's most ancient and psychologically significant archetypes. It represents the disruptive force of creative chaos, the impulse that overturns established order and invites new ways of thinking. Found in nearly every mythological system, this figure appears as Loki in Norse legends, the coyote in Native American tales, and Anansi, the spider, in African folklore, spider god in African folklore. The trickster thrives on breaking rules, challenging logic, and subverting expectations through cleverness, mischief, and irreverence. Psychologically, the trickster serves as the internal voice that rebels against blind conformity, exposes deceit, and refuses to be confined by rigid social or moral codes. It helps individuals and societies remain mentally flexible, protecting them from the dangers of stagnation that arise from dogmatic beliefs or rigid ideologies. In contrast to the trickster's chaotic energy, the magician archetype embodies the pursuit of transformation, insight, and mastery over invisible forces. This figure represents those who possess access to deeper knowledge and who can channel unseen energies to initiate meaningful change, both within themselves and in the external world. When expressed in its most constructive form, the magician offers wisdom, healing, and guidance through journeys of personal or spiritual evolution. However, the magician also has a darker side. When corrupted, this archetype can morph into a manipulative figure who distorts reality for self-serving ends or assumes the role of a grandiose guru who overreaches by claiming supernatural authority. Such negative manifestations illustrate the dangers of wielding archetypal influence without humility or ethical grounding. Cultural archetypes are born from a society's shared experiences, values, and symbolic narratives. These patterns reflect the ideals, fears, and collective aspirations that shape a culture's identity. In the United States, for example, recurring figures such as the self-reliant entrepreneur, the rebellious outsider, and the fearless pioneer capture key elements of the national mythology. Other societies produce their own symbolic frameworks informed by distinct histories, environments, and social dynamics. These archetypal images deeply affect how individuals within a culture view themselves, interpret success, and relate to others. Understanding these cultural blueprints is essential for appreciating the misunderstandings that can occur between people of different backgrounds, even when their personalities or goals appear to align on the surface. Carl Jung warned that cultural archetypes become problematic when they become overly rigid or when they suppress essential dimensions of the human psyche. For instance, a society that idolizes the warrior or the sovereign may undervalue emotional intelligence, caregiving, or cooperative behavior. Conversely, cultures that elevate nurturing or maternal roles may struggle to fully embrace ambition, assertiveness, or competitive energy. As societies progress, their dominant archetypes often shift. These changes arise in response to new cultural needs, evolving norms, and broader understandings of human potential. On an individual level, psychological maturity often involves reassessing the archetypes inherited from one's culture and forging a more integrated personal relationship with the universal symbols that underlie them. For individuals involved in artistic, entrepreneurial, or innovation-centered fields, the archetypes of the trickster and the magician are especially vital. The trickster brings the boldness to defy tradition, explore unconventional ideas, and treat failure as a necessary stage in the creative process. The magician contributes the clarity, discipline, and transformational insight needed to shape chaos into purposeful innovation. Still, without conscious awareness, these powerful energies can become destructive. An unexamined trickster impulse may lead to empty provocation or destabilizing behavior, while an unchecked magician may drift into deception, delusion, or inflated self-importance. Developing an intentional and reflective relationship with these archetypes allows individuals to channel their energies constructively, serving both personal growth and broader societal evolution, while avoiding the common traps of ego-driven misalignment and shadow projection. Part 5. The Stages of Life. Carl Jung revolutionized the understanding of human development by asserting that psychological growth continues far beyond childhood and adolescence, extending throughout the entirety of a person's life. He identified distinct developmental milestones and inner challenges unique to each phase of life, offering individuals opportunities for personal evolution, insight, and self-discovery at every turn. Rather than relying solely on biological or social frameworks, Jung's model emphasized the inner world, the psychological and spiritual forces at play during major life transitions. He believed that external changes often mirror deeper internal transformations. When people recognize the symbolic richness embedded in each life stage, they are better equipped to navigate transitions with clarity and intention. What may appear as crises are, in many cases, opportunities to grow, not simply problems to be solved, but pivotal moments calling for a deeper engagement with the self. According to Jung, the first half of life, typically lasting until around the age of 40, is primarily about ego development and adapting to the demands of the external world. During this phase, individuals are focused on shaping their identity, building competence, forging close relationships, and establishing their place within society. Key psychological tasks in this stage include becoming independent from parental figures, developing self-assurance, forming lasting bonds, and contributing to the larger community through work and family life. A successful passage through this period is characterized by a well-formed ego, the mastery of life skills, and a secure position in the social structure. As individuals move into their late 30s or early 50s, they often reach a profound turning point known as the midlife transition. At this stage, the pursuits and achievements that once brought satisfaction may begin to feel hollow or incomplete. Jung observed that this period can be marked by inner conflict as people begin to question whether their previous goals have truly met their deeper need for meaning. This introspective phase frequently brings with it a stronger awareness of mortality, the recognition of untapped potential, and a growing desire to turn inward rather than remain outwardly focused. Though often referred to as a midlife crisis, Jung saw this transition not as a breakdown, but as a critical psychological shift. It represents a move away from external validation and worldly success toward a deeper alignment with one's inner life. This shift is central to what Jung termed individuation, a process through which the person moves closer to their authentic self, grounded in inner truth and spiritual maturity. The latter half of life requires a fundamentally different psychological approach. Rather than chasing goals driven by the ego or seeking validation from the external world, individuals are invited to pursue values and aims that transcend personal achievement. This stage is about cultivating wisdom rather than gathering information, and about finding meaning in the limitations, losses, and mortality that inevitably arise. Jung believed that this stage naturally carries a spiritual or religious dimension, not necessarily tied to formal religion, but involving a sense of connection to something beyond the individual self. As people move deeper into the second half of life, they often develop a more symbolic understanding of their experiences and seek to place the events of their lives within a larger, more timeless context. This broader perspective helps reframe day-to-day concerns and invites a deeper sense of peace. At every major developmental stage, Jung stressed the need for what he described as the sacrifice of the previous attitude. This means letting go of outdated identities, beliefs, and psychological patterns that may have been essential at earlier stages, but now hinder further growth. For those entering adulthood, this may involve relinquishing the comforts and illusions of childhood in favor of responsibility and self-reliance. In midlife, it often requires releasing the fantasy of endless youth and limitless potential, and instead embracing maturity, acceptance, and a deeper sense of self. These necessary sacrifices are rarely without struggle. Life transitions frequently involve emotional resistance, inner chaos, and sometimes periods of depression or apparent regression. However, Jung believed that these painful experiences are not signs of failure, but essential preludes to transformation. They mark the symbolic deaths that make way for psychological rebirths. By recognizing the deeper meaning behind these transitions, individuals can face life's changes with greater resilience, patience, and trust in the lifelong process of becoming, rather than clinging to what must naturally be left behind. Part 6. Midlife Crisis and Psychological Transformation. Carl Jung recognized the midlife crisis as a pivotal moment in the psychological development of adults, a period marked by profound transformation in self-awareness and consciousness. He noted that, typically between the late 30s and early 50s, individuals are often compelled to re-examine the core beliefs, goals, and identities that once gave their lives structure and meaning. This inner turmoil may present itself through emotional distress, such as anxiety or depression, alongside tensions in relationships, dissatisfaction with one's career, or a persistent sense of emptiness, despite apparent success or material comfort. Jung did not interpret these symptoms as pathology, but rather as urgent signals from the unconscious mind, indicating that the psyche is demanding a fundamental reorientation and a new direction in life. Such crises tend to emerge when individuals confront the realization that the external achievements pursued during early adulthood, such as professional success, financial security, or social validation, have not delivered the enduring sense of purpose they had hoped for. Successful professionals may feel unexpectedly disheartened, and parents whose children have grown independent may begin to question their personal identity and role in life. Likewise, those in long-standing relationships might start to reassess whether their emotional and psychological needs are truly being met. This often initiates a phase of deep self-reflection and existential questioning, which can feel like the unraveling of a once stable foundation. Yet Jung saw this psychological breakdown not as a failure, but as a critical step in the journey toward reconstructing the self on more authentic and mature foundations. Central to this transformative period is a significant shift in the balance between the conscious ego and the unconscious psyche. Earlier in life, the ego tends to lead, driven by ambition, cultural norms, and goal-oriented thinking. As one reaches midlife, however, the unconscious begins to assert itself more powerfully and insistently. This emergence often takes the form of vivid dreams, emotional turbulence, unexpected desires, or attractions that seem at odds with the ego's established path. The result is an internal conflict between the well-worn identity shaped by years of habit and expectation and newly awakened aspects of the psyche that seek acknowledgement and integration. Jung identified recurring motifs in this stage of development. Many people begin to question the social roles and professional images they have carefully built, recognizing that these personas may no longer represent their true values or emotional reality. There is often a renewed interest in neglected aspects of the self, creative passions set aside in pursuit of practicality, or emotional needs suppressed for the sake of logic and productivity. As this inner inquiry continues, traits that were previously hidden or denied, what Jung termed the shadow, often rise to the surface with growing urgency. Individuals may become more conscious of long-repressed desires or behaviors they had unconsciously projected onto others. Successfully navigating this volatile stage requires cultivating what Jung described as a religious attitude, not necessarily tied to institutional religion, but grounded in a sincere openness to something greater than the ego's personal agenda. This mindset entails acknowledging that life's meaning may extend beyond individual ambition or achievement. It involves learning to hear and respect the voice of the unconscious while also preserving the ego's capacity to manage the demands of everyday life. Integrating these opposing forces is rarely immediate. Instead, it unfolds slowly and progressively over time. Throughout this extended period of transformation, people may undergo significant changes in their relationships, professional lives, and daily routines. As they work to align their outer circumstances with their inner truth, the ultimate goal becomes living in deeper harmony with their most authentic and integrated self. Part 7. Reconciling Inner Opposites. Carl Jung's idea of integrating opposites remains one of his most influential insights into psychological health and personal transformation. He understood that the human psyche is inherently shaped by contradictions, conflicting desires, opposing traits, and divergent perspectives. These inner divisions are often the root of emotional turmoil and mental unrest. Rather than resolving these contradictions by suppressing one side or choosing a singular path, Jung believed that true psychological development comes from consciously holding both sides in tension. This dynamic balancing act gives rise to a unifying process he called the transcendent function, a breakthrough that allows the emergence of a new, more integrated way of being that transcends the original conflict. This profound transformation is not achieved through intellect or willpower alone. At its foundation lies the most essential psychological duality, the split between the conscious and unconscious minds. While consciousness tends to favor structure, clarity, and logical order, the unconscious embodies instinct, chaos, and the irrational, frequently challenging or contradicting the conscious self's aims and values. Psychological suffering often arises when individuals try to impose rigid conscious control, ignoring or repressing the messages and energies of the unconscious. Integration, in Jung's view, involves remaining grounded in awareness, while also opening up to the influence of the unconscious. It is a continual dialogue between logic and intuition, rather than domination by reason or instinct alone. Jung also identified additional core dualities within the psyche: thinking versus feeling, sensation versus intuition, introversion versus extroversion, and the symbolic dynamics of masculinity and femininity. Most people naturally identify more with one side of each polarity, relegating the opposite qualities to the unconscious. While this can build certain strengths, it also creates blind spots and areas of imbalance that hinder full psychological development. Achieving mature psychological integration means intentionally cultivating the underdeveloped aspects of oneself, not by rejecting one's primary tendencies, but by complementing them with their opposites. This results in a more adaptable, balanced, and whole personality. Yet, the process of embracing unfamiliar traits can provoke anxiety or resistance, as it challenges deeply ingrained notions of identity and self. Importantly, Jung emphasized that integration is not about erasing conflict or attaining some fixed state of equilibrium. Instead, it's about developing the inner capacity to remain centered amidst opposing forces. This state of balance generates what Jung termed creative tension, an energizing inner dynamic that fuels personal insight, creative breakthroughs, and spiritual growth. Individuals who manage to integrate their inner opposites tend to develop remarkable psychological depth and flexibility. They are able to face complexity and uncertainty without collapsing into chaos or rigid defensiveness. This inner resilience also transforms their relationships and social interactions. Jung observed that many interpersonal conflicts arise from unconscious projections, where unresolved internal struggles are cast onto others. These projections can distort perception and create tension in relationships. As people become more aware of their own contradictions, They reduce the need to project and begin to see others with greater clarity and empathy. Such inner work leads to a deeper form of psychological maturity, marked by compassion, openness, and the ability to engage meaningfully across differences in thought, temperament, and culture. Part 8. Jung's approach to dream analysis. Carl Jung revolutionized the study of dreams by departing from Sigmund Freud's interpretation, instead presenting dreams as essential tools for psychological insight and conscious development. Whereas Freud maintained that dreams were mostly veiled expressions of repressed sexual urges, Jung viewed them as internal mechanisms that work to balance the psyche. In Jung's view, dreams provide valuable perspectives and knowledge that counterbalance the conscious mind's tendencies. He did not treat dreams as riddles to be cracked through intellectual reasoning. Rather, he regarded them as straightforward, though symbolic, communications from the unconscious. To truly understand these messages, one must approach their symbols with an openness to their inherent significance instead of forcing them into rigid theoretical frameworks. Jung developed a method known as amplification to deepen dream interpretation. This technique expands the meaning of dream symbols by connecting them to broader mythological, cultural, and archetypal narratives. Rather than limiting the analysis to the dreamer's personal associations, Jung would, for example, examine the appearance of a snake in a dream by referencing both the individual's unique experiences and the powerful symbolic roles snakes play across religions, myths, and folklore worldwide. This approach acknowledges that dream symbols can carry both intimate, personal meanings and shared, collective significance. Amplification reveals these archetypal layers while remaining grounded in the dreamer's personal reality, thereby connecting inner psychological growth with timeless human themes and traditions. Central to Jung's theory was the idea that dreams often serve a compensatory function, meaning they present images and narratives that offer contrast or equilibrium to the dreamer's waking attitudes. A person who relies predominantly on reason and suppresses emotion, for instance, might dream of uncontrollable natural events like storms or floods. On the other hand, someone who avoids taking initiative might dream of themselves in positions of power or leadership. One of the most prominent recurring motifs in Jungian dream work is the shadow archetype, a figure that often appears in dreams as a criminal, a menacing stranger, or someone of the same gender who embodies traits the dreamer has disowned or denied. Rather than seeing these figures as threats, Jung encouraged individuals to view them as opportunities to confront and integrate neglected aspects of their own personality. Jung also observed that dreams frequently unfold in sequences, where certain symbols and motifs develop over time. This evolving imagery suggests a sustained exchange between the conscious and unconscious mind. By maintaining a dream journal and paying close attention to repeated symbols, characters, or scenarios, individuals can begin to uncover deeper psychological patterns and better understand how these relate to their everyday lives. Some dreams seem to respond directly to the dreamer's current experiences, offering immediate psychological feedback. Others appear more prophetic, foreshadowing future events, or providing essential guidance during periods of transition or personal evolution. The most significant dreams often include archetypal imagery that connects an individual's inner development to broader human and spiritual themes. Jung emphasized that Meaningful dream interpretation must involve the active participation of the dreamer. Rather than relying solely on analysts or experts, individuals are encouraged to engage directly with their dreams through introspection, creative practices like drawing or writing, and techniques such as active imagination. Interpreting a dream, in this sense, is not a passive exercise, but a deeply personal and creative exploration. Because dreams rarely reveal their full meaning right away, they require time, reflection, and a willingness to approach them from various perspectives. The aim is not to extract a single, final interpretation, but to foster an evolving and meaningful relationship with the unconscious mind. This ongoing dialogue nurtures self-awareness and supports the lifelong process of individuation, Jung's term for the journey toward psychological wholeness. Part 9. Active Imagination. Active imagination represents Carl Jung's most groundbreaking therapeutic method and a central pillar in his work on engaging the unconscious mind. This approach requires a deliberate descent into imaginative experiences while maintaining enough conscious awareness to observe, engage with, and reflect on the psychological material that surfaces. In contrast to idle daydreaming or spontaneous fantasy, active imagination calls for focused attention and a sincere readiness to converse with the symbolic images and inner figures that emerge, figures that appear to possess their own thoughts, desires, and personalities. Jung first began using this technique during the psychological crisis that followed his break with Freud. He turned to it as a way of exploring the disturbing and chaotic contents of his inner world, which would later be documented in his celebrated Red Book. The process involves entering a calm yet attentive mental state in which spontaneous images, characters, or narratives begin to arise from the unconscious. Rather than steering or controlling what appears, the individual is encouraged to carefully observe and interact with these psychic contents as though they were real and autonomous entities with psychological depth. This might involve holding conversations with internal figures, navigating imagined landscapes, or witnessing symbolic dramas unfold, always with conscious awareness and a strong ethical compass. What sets active imagination apart is the seriousness with which these inner experiences are treated, not as escapism or whimsy, but as meaningful expressions of the psyche that hold real psychological weight. Jung eventually saw this method as a vital access point to the archetypal world and an effective means of working with psychological complexes in a transformative way. Disturbing figures from nightmares or unsettling dreams, often perceived as threats, can be encountered and reinterpreted through this method, sometimes revealing hidden strengths or important messages. These previously frightening entities may shift into sources of guidance or empowerment. Likewise, inner representations of the Anima and Animus, the feminine side of the male psyche and the masculine side of the female psyche, can be engaged through dialogue, leading to greater integration and harmony of these inner opposites. Such inner interactions also create a pathway for examining personal complexes, emotionally charged patterns rooted in past experiences. By facing them consciously, individuals can uncover their underlying needs and unresolved tensions, opening the possibility for transformation. Active imagination offers a structured, intentional approach to exploring these deep psychological forces without becoming overwhelmed by them. That said, Jung emphasized the importance of approaching this work with a strong ethical framework and clearly defined psychological boundaries. It is essential to stay anchored in one's conscious ego and not be swept away or dominated by the powerful forces of the unconscious. Practitioners must take care not to act on any harmful urges that may arise and must always maintain a clear distinction between the inner world of imagination and the outer world of daily life. Rather than being a form of psychological retreat, active imagination is meant to enhance engagement with reality. It brings insights, emotional depth, and mental clarity that enrich personal relationships and support real-world responsibilities. Jung noted that this practice often leads to breakthroughs in creativity and healing that purely analytical or rational methods struggle to achieve. Conflicts that appear unsolvable through logic alone can often find resolution when expressed symbolically in the imagination. Likewise, fresh, surprising answers to real-life problems may emerge through interactions with unconscious figures. By cultivating a connection with the deeper layers of the psyche, active imagination supports continuous personal growth across the lifespan. For many people, consistent practice of this technique nurtures creativity, fosters emotional resilience, and deepens insight into the self. It becomes a reliable source of inner guidance, especially during periods of crisis, transition, or uncertainty. Ultimately, active imagination serves as a profound and enduring tool for inner exploration and the conscious integration of the unconscious mind. Part 10. Word Association and Other Therapeutic Techniques. Carl Jung's early work with word association tests significantly advanced the understanding of the unconscious mind, offering the first scientific evidence for the presence of autonomous psychological complexes. In these experiments, Jung would present patients with a series of trigger words and carefully observe their responses. He meticulously tracked both the emotional reactions and response times associated with each word, paying close attention to any unusual delays, unexpected answers, or visible emotional discomfort. Time and again, certain words would provoke hesitation, mental blanks, or physical reactions, indications of underlying psychological material functioning independently of the individual's conscious awareness. These results demonstrated that the unconscious possesses its own structure and capacity to interrupt conscious thought, thereby reinforcing psychoanalytic theories about repressed or hidden psychic content. Moving beyond the word association technique, Jung developed a wide range of innovative therapeutic practices that focused on engaging the unconscious through symbolic and creative means. This marked a departure from conventional talk-based analysis and interpretation. He encouraged patients to access deeper layers of their psyche through artistic activities, spontaneous movement, sand play, and other expressive, nonverbal forms of exploration. These methods allowed clients to bypass intellectual defenses, enabling unconscious material to emerge more authentically and vividly. Jung believed that some of the most essential psychological insights could not be fully captured through language alone. Instead, they required symbolic or artistic expression for genuine emotional understanding and integration. Such creative techniques often brought to light core psychological themes and potential pathways to healing that remained hidden when therapy relied solely on logical reasoning or spoken dialogue. Among Jung's central methods was a process he called amplification. This technique sought to deepen the meaning of personal experiences, such as dreams, emotional disturbances, or symbolic imagery, by drawing connections to wider mythological, cultural, or archetypal motifs. When a person shared a particularly powerful dream or significant emotional event, the therapist would explore its symbolic parallels in global mythology, literature, and spiritual traditions. This expanded interpretive context helped individuals understand their personal experiences as part of a universal human narrative, rather than isolated subjective problems. This broader perspective often brought clarity, reassurance, and emotional insight in the midst of psychological difficulty. Amplification also revealed the archetypal dimension underlying personal experiences, linking the individual's inner life with the timeless symbols and themes that shape collective human consciousness. Alongside this, Jung also introduced his theory of psychological types, which provided a crucial framework for understanding individual differences in personality and enhancing interpersonal relationships. By guiding patients to recognize their innate psychological tendencies and to acknowledge the limitations that arise from less developed aspects of their psyche, Jungian therapy supported greater emotional flexibility and inner harmony. Understanding how different people prefer to perceive the world and make decisions fostered healthier communication and mutual respect, highlighting that psychological diversity is natural rather than pathological. This outlook shifted the goal of therapy from altering fundamental personality traits to helping individuals embrace who they are, make better use of their strengths, and consciously develop neglected parts of themselves. Perhaps Jung's most enduring insight was his recognition of the therapeutic relationship as a catalyst for healing in its own right. He rejected the idea of therapy as a one-way process in which a detached expert treats the patient. Instead, he saw it as a dynamic, reciprocal relationship that fosters transformation in both therapist and client. Jung emphasized that therapists must be fully present and emotionally open to the relationship, willing to be personally affected by the therapeutic dialogue. He opposed the use of impersonal roles or rigid theoretical frameworks as shields against vulnerability. Rather, he called for authenticity, humility, and ongoing self-reflection on the part of the therapist. Practitioners were expected to engage with their own inner lives, recognizing their unresolved complexes and projections that could shape the therapeutic process. In Jung's conception, psychotherapy was not just a clinical intervention, but a joint quest for psychological truth. He believed that true healing and growth occur through a genuine human bond, one rooted in honesty, mutual respect, and the willingness to be changed by the encounter. Part 11. The Red Book and Liber Novus. Between 1913 and 1930, Carl Jung experienced a profound psychological upheaval that would come to define his legacy in the field of depth psychology. This period of intense self-exploration followed a painful and dramatic break from Sigmund Freud, after which Jung embarked on what he later termed a confrontation with the unconscious, a time of inner turmoil marked by emotional volatility and psychological uncertainty. Rather than turning to external sources for relief or retreating from the intensity of his condition, Jung made a bold and unconventional decision. He chose to face his internal world head-on. Engaging systematically with the spontaneous contents of his psyche, he developed what he would later identify as the method of active imagination, a disciplined approach to exploring unconscious material. This internal journey, both risky and transformative, laid the experiential groundwork for virtually all of his subsequent psychological theories. The most significant artifact to emerge from this inner pilgrimage was the Red Book, originally titled Liber Novus, meaning New Book. In its pages, Jung recorded a series of visionary experiences populated by autonomous inner figures, personalities such as Philemon, Salome, and Elijah, who appeared to possess independent agency and wisdom beyond the reach of his conscious awareness. He engaged these inner figures in prolonged, often intense conversations, questioning them on subjects ranging from the nature of reality and the structure of the psyche to the ultimate meaning of human life. Jung documented these dialogues with meticulous care, even when they challenged his rational worldview and forced him to grapple with concepts that stood outside the framework of conventional science. These inner personalities functioned as spiritual guides, helping him navigate the often disorienting depths of the unconscious while maintaining a fragile yet vital psychological balance. To access this realm, Jung entered a receptive, meditative state that allowed vivid images and symbolic narratives to emerge from the unconscious. He treated these encounters with the same gravity one would assign to tangible, external events, interacting with the visions as though they were sentient beings with unique perspectives and intentions. Typically, Jung would initiate the process by posing direct questions to these inner characters, patiently awaiting their replies. Their answers frequently astonished him, expressing insights far beyond the reach of his conscious mind. This led Jung to believe that these figures were not mere projections or inventions of fantasy, but real, autonomous elements within the structure of the psyche. This endeavor demanded extraordinary psychological courage. Jung could never predict what would arise from the depths, disturbing imagery, painful truths, or complex symbolic material that tested the limits of his emotional endurance. The Red Book not only preserves the content of his dialogues with these inner entities, but also showcases the rich visual landscape of his visionary experiences. The manuscript itself is a masterwork, lavishly illustrated with intricate paintings, symbolic motifs, and ornate calligraphy. Each visual and textual element was carefully crafted to convey the emotional intensity and symbolic meaning of his encounters. These illustrations were not merely decorative, they served as an extension of his active imagination practice, deepening his engagement with the unconscious. The fusion of narrative and visual art within the Red Book forms a comprehensive record of Jung's individuation process, the inner psychological transformation that became central to his later theories on archetypes, psychological typology, and the layered structure of the unconscious mind. Despite its foundational importance, Jung chose to keep this work private during his lifetime, sharing it only with a few close associates. He feared that public exposure of such deeply personal and mystical material might compromise his credibility as a scientist and lead to the dismissal of his emerging theories. It wasn't until 2009, nearly 50 years after his death, that the Red Book was finally published, granting the world access to the visionary text that shaped the core of analytical psychology. This remarkable work reveals that Jung's ideas were not born from speculative thought or detached analysis, but from a direct, fearless engagement with the unconscious itself. The Red Book stands as compelling proof that the unconscious is not a hypothetical construct, but a living, dynamic reality, one with which the conscious mind can interact in meaningful and transformative ways. Part 12. UFOs as Expressions of the Psyche. In Flying Saucers, a modern myth of things seen in the skies, Carl Jung delves into the UFO phenomenon not as evidence of extraterrestrial visitation, but as a powerful symbolic expression rooted in the collective psyche. Rather than investigating whether unidentified flying objects are physical crafts from other worlds, Jung was more concerned with understanding why so many individuals across cultures reported seeing similar circular, radiant objects in the sky, and why these visions seemed to intensify during periods of collective tension. Jung observed that spikes in UFO sightings often coincided with times of societal unrest, fear, and instability. From this pattern, he proposed that these sightings were not literal encounters, but rather symbolic projections, manifestations of unconscious psychological content projected onto the sky. These images, in Jung's view, served as externalized reflections of inner turmoil. He found that such experiences shared symbolic characteristics with religious visions and archetypal dreams. The psychological depth of these encounters pointed to the same inner sources that generate profound spiritual revelations and transformative personal experiences. Jung was particularly struck by the prevalence of the circular shape in UFO sightings, which he connected to the mandala, a symbol found across spiritual traditions that conveys unity, totality, and the archetype of the self. For years, Jung had noted that people undergoing deep inner transformation are often drawn to circular imagery, interpreting it as a symbol of emerging integration or psychic wholeness. On this basis, he theorized that the collective obsession with UFOs might represent a mass projection of the self-archetype onto the heavens, a symbolic expression of a cultural longing for psychological cohesion, transcendence, and spiritual renewal. The luminous quality frequently reported in UFO encounters further tied these phenomena to age-old symbols of divine light, commonly associated with enlightenment and sacred presence. Their glowing appearance seemed to carry a numinous charge, radiating a kind of spiritual energy that spoke to the human impulse to connect with something greater than the material realm. Jung emphasized that many individuals who reported UFO sightings or close encounters were often in states of psychological upheaval or existential crisis. This paralleled the circumstances under which religious or mystical visions typically occur. Witnesses often described overwhelming emotional reactions, fear, awe, reverence, responses closely aligned with those evoked by archetypal or divine experiences. He also drew attention to how alien abduction narratives often mirrored ancient shamanic initiations. These stories, rich in symbolic content, frequently featured journeys to otherworldly dimensions, interactions with non-human intelligences, and the acquisition of esoteric knowledge or personal transformation. For Jung, these parallels suggested that such encounters served a psychological function similar to ancient religious myths and visionary traditions, offering a form of symbolic guidance and inner change tailored to the modern era. The technological nature of UFOs, their futuristic appearance, and seemingly impossible capabilities reflected the contemporary context in which these archetypal images were emerging. Jung recognized that archetypes do not manifest in a vacuum. They always take shape within the cultural and historical conditions of their time. In an age shaped by science, machinery, and rapid innovation, it made sense that visions of transcendence would adopt the language of technology rather than that of traditional religion. Viewed in this way, UFOs became more than just mysterious objects in the sky. They functioned as symbolic intermediaries between the empirical world of science and the enduring human need for wonder, meaning, and connection to a higher reality. UFOs thus operated as modern myths, fusing the rational and the mystical to address psychological needs that science alone could not satisfy. Jung's reading of the UFO phenomenon reflects his broader view that psychological projections become especially intense during times of collective disorientation, when dominant social structures and symbolic systems lose their capacity to guide or inspire. The years following World War II, shaped by the terrifying power of nuclear weapons, breathtaking technological progress, and rapid cultural change, were marked by deep existential anxiety. In this volatile atmosphere, UFOs emerged as vessels through which the collective unconscious voiced both its fear of annihilation and its hope for salvation, possibly in the form of superior, benevolent beings who might reveal a path beyond humanity's current crises. Ultimately, Jung saw the rise of UFO mythology as a reflection of a deeper psychological hunger, the desire for new symbolic frameworks capable of restoring meaning in a fragmented world. These visions offered a bridge to the spiritual and mythic dimensions of life, domains that the scientific worldview often overlooks, but which remain vital to the human soul's search for purpose and coherence in an era dominated by reason and machinery. Part 13. The Archetypes of Senex and Puer. The symbolic tension between the Senex and the Puer archetypes represents one of the most insightful psychological dualities described by Carl Jung. This dynamic illustrates the enduring interplay between the forces of age and youth, stability and change, order and spontaneity, elements that shape both our inner development and the evolution of entire civilizations. The Puer Eternus, or eternal youth, reflects the part of the human psyche that is eternally youthful, imaginative, and brimming with unrealized potential. This archetype is fueled by creativity and boundless possibility, yet it often struggles with limitations, long-term responsibility, and the grounded demands of adult life. By contrast, the Senex, or the wise old man, stands for experience, structure, discipline, and foresight. It offers clarity and stability, though it may also become overly rigid, conservative, or resistant to change. Understanding how these two opposing energies interact is crucial during life transitions, in creative endeavors, and in the effort to strike a lasting balance between freedom and responsibility, an ongoing challenge faced not only by individuals, but by societies as a whole. Those who strongly embody the Puer archetype often radiate childlike awe, exceptional creativity, and an infectious optimism. They may possess visionary insight and the rare ability to imagine life unconstrained by conventional limitations. However, the shadow of the Puer reveals itself in a reluctance to commit, an inclination to abandon goals once the excitement fades, and a tendency to avoid the discipline necessary to bring ideas to fruition. Individuals influenced by the Puer may also contend with addictive behaviors, volatile emotional lives, or chronic dissatisfaction, endlessly seeking idealized experiences that never fully match their inner visions. As a result, they may experience deep disillusionment when confronted with the imperfections of reality. Conversely, The Senex archetype brings essential grounding traits: wisdom, perseverance, and the capacity to build lasting systems and institutions that carry cultural values forward. Those aligned with the Senex often excel in leadership, mentoring, and long-range planning. They serve as teachers, elders, and guardians of tradition, helping younger generations learn from the past while laying the groundwork for future growth. Yet, when taken to an extreme, the Senex may become dogmatic, overly cautious, and dismissive of new ideas. Its darker side can suppress youthful innovation and impose perfectionistic or critical standards that stifle growth and creativity. Jung maintained that genuine psychological growth does not come from favoring one archetype over the other, but from the integration of both. A psychologically mature person retains the Puer's sense of wonder and receptivity, while also developing the Senex's ability to commit, structure, and persevere over time. This integrated approach becomes especially relevant during midlife, when many face the task of reconciling their youthful dreams with the insights gained through lived experience. The internal dialogue between Puer and Senex can become a powerful engine for creativity, one that unites visionary thinking with practical implementation, avoiding both the escapism of eternal adolescence and the stagnation of overbearing tradition. On a societal level, the same archetypal polarity is reflected in generational and cultural movements. The dynamic between the innovation of youth and the conservatism of age fuels the ongoing debate between change and continuity. Just as individuals need both inspiration and discipline, societies rely on the Puer's drive to question norms and explore new possibilities, as well as on the Senex's role in preserving wisdom and maintaining cohesion. The friction between generations often mirrors this deeper pattern. Younger voices advocate for transformation, while older generations strive to protect the structures and hard-won lessons of the past. Recognizing this archetypal underpinning can help shift the conversation from one of conflict to one of mutual recognition and shared purpose, making way for deeper understanding and collaboration. In the end, both forward momentum and rooted tradition are vital for healthy personal and collective development. By embracing the dynamic tension between the Puer and the Senex, we can foster a more integrated vision of growth, one that celebrates the new while honoring the old, ensuring continuity without sacrificing creativity. Part 14. The Psychoid Archetype and the Unity of Mind and Matter. Carl Jung's concept of the Psychoid archetype represents one of his most innovative and forward-looking contributions to understanding the connection between consciousness and the physical universe. In the latter part of his career, Jung advanced the notion that archetypes were not limited to the internal domain of the psyche, but also acted as fundamental organizing principles with influence over both mental processes and physical phenomena. This radical perspective suggested that the symbolic patterns recurring in dreams, mythology, and psychological development might correspond to universal forces that structure the behavior of matter and energy itself. By introducing the idea of the psychoid archetype, Jung anticipated contemporary dialogues aimed at bridging the divide between consciousness research and quantum theory, implying that both mind and matter might emerge from a single, deeper source. Jung's exploration of the psyche-matter relationship was further enriched by his intellectual partnership with the renowned physicist Wolfgang Pauli. Together, They examined the phenomenon of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that seem to elude conventional causal explanations. Their collaboration focused on the hypothesis that mental and physical events might be interconnected through deeper patterns that cut across the usual boundary separating subjective consciousness from objective reality. Their inquiries took into account the puzzling observations in quantum mechanics, where the role of the observer appears to influence the behavior of particles. This challenged the classical materialist paradigm and led Jung to wonder whether the same archetypal structures he identified in human psychology might also underlie the coherence found in the physical world. According to the Psychoid hypothesis, archetypes operate in a realm that transcends the dichotomy of mind and matter, a kind of intermediary domain where both psychological and physical realities converge. In this psychophysical zone, archetypes can emerge as internal symbols when perceived by the conscious mind, or take the form of patterns in the material world when expressed through matter and energy. Such a framework may explain why archetypal imagery is not limited to the inner world of the psyche, but also manifests in the natural order, in the symmetry of crystals, the organization of living organisms, and the mathematical precision found in physical laws. Jung speculated that consciousness and matter might not be separate entities, but dual expressions of the same underlying archetypal essence, two different ways of perceiving a unified, holistic reality. This integrative model offers a potential solution to the enduring conflict between scientific materialism and psychological or spiritual paradigms. Rather than seeing them as fundamentally incompatible, Jung proposed that these perspectives are complementary, each reflecting a facet of a more profound underlying reality. This theory takes on particular significance when applied to the understanding of synchronicity, those moments when external events appear to align with internal psychological states in deeply meaningful ways. If archetypes truly function across both mental and material dimensions, then synchronicities could be interpreted as windows into the deeper unity of existence, brief, illuminating instances where the boundary between inner and outer dissolves. Such experiences often carry a powerful symbolic charge, as though the external world were mirroring the internal condition of the individual. Rather than dismissing these moments as random or merely psychological projections, the theory of the psychoid archetype views them as authentic manifestations of the shared structure that links mind and matter. In recent years, disciplines such as quantum field theory, systems science, consciousness studies, and Rupert Sheldrake's theory of morphic resonance have proposed models that resonate strongly with Jung's vision. These fields increasingly suggest that pattern, organization, and form may be more fundamental to the nature of reality than mind or matter considered independently. Jung's idea of the psychoid archetype thus serves as a profound psychological lens through which to interpret these converging insights. It offers a way of understanding reality in which scientific observation and inner experience are not mutually exclusive, but are both guided by the same deep-seated principles that shape the universe. In the end, this unified perspective holds the promise of a richer and more inclusive understanding of existence, one that honors both the rigor of empirical science and the depth of the human psyche, recognizing them as intertwined reflections of a single archetypal foundation underlying all that is. Part 15. The Symbolic Life. Carl Jung's idea of the symbolic life encapsulates his profound insights into how individuals in the modern age can maintain a vital link to deeper sources of meaning in a world increasingly driven by logic, technology, and material concerns. He observed that the dominant culture of his time, and even more so today, has become alienated from symbolic thought, which is the capacity to connect personal experience with universal, spiritual, and mythic dimensions. For Jung, living symbolically meant remaining sensitive to the hidden layers of significance in daily life. Rather than interpreting the world solely through rational or utilitarian frameworks, this approach calls us to perceive ordinary events as mirrors of timeless archetypes and narratives that resonate across human history. Embracing this perspective allows one to stay rooted in the sacred, even while navigating the practicalities of modern existence. Central to Jung's philosophy is the distinction he drew between signs and symbols. He described signs as straightforward indicators that convey specific, known information. Symbols, however, point toward realities that cannot be fully grasped through direct explanation. They evoke mystery, paradox, and intuitive understanding. To engage with life symbolically is to notice when an image, event, or moment reveals more than meets the eye, serving as a portal to deeper meaning. This perspective requires what Jung referred to as the symbolic attitude, a way of seeing that embraces ambiguity, depth, and layers of interpretation. It counters the modern tendency to flatten experience into data or utility, and instead encourages openness to the unconscious, to dreams, and to the numinous. Living symbolically means cultivating attentiveness to moments of synchronicity, to the messages embedded in dreams, and to the inner imagery that can offer guidance where rationality falls short. Jung encouraged people to keep this connection alive through intentional practices that honor the symbolic aspect of life. These might include journaling one's dreams, creating art, spending contemplative time in nature, or engaging in rituals that foster a sense of the sacred. The goal is not to discard reason, but to deepen it, by integrating other modes of knowing that go beyond analysis and speak to the soul. He cautioned that when people lose access to the symbolic dimension, they often experience what he called spiritual impoverishment, a pervasive sense of meaninglessness that achievement, knowledge, or material success cannot dispel. In such a state, life often feels hollow, reduced to repetition, productivity, and surface-level distraction, while deeper human needs, such as the longing for connection, transcendence, and purpose, go unfulfilled. In contrast, the symbolic life offers an antidote to this inner void. It enables people to recognize the presence of the sacred in the fabric of everyday life, and to relate to enduring patterns that give structure and significance to human experience. Importantly, this way of life does not require adherence to any particular religious system. Rather, it fosters an attitude of reverence, curiosity, and humility in the face of life's profound complexity. Living symbolically also allows one to interpret personal struggles as part of a larger, universal storyline. Difficulties in relationships, for instance, can be understood within the archetypal tension between independence and union. Challenges in career or vocation may echo the hero's journey, an inner call to authenticity and deeper purpose. This interpretive lens transforms suffering into a meaningful process, affirming that hardship has a place in a larger unfolding and is not merely random or senseless. At its core, the symbolic life is a way of engaging with the world that honors both intellect and intuition. It fosters a spirit of wonder and receptivity, providing a sense of meaning that endures even through adversity. In Jung's view, this path reconnects us to what is most essential and timeless in the human experience and helps us live not just effectively, but profoundly and purposefully. Part 16. Psychological Types in Relationships and Teams. Carl Jung's theory of psychological types offers a powerful framework for understanding how people relate to one another, both personally and professionally. It reveals how diverse personality patterns influence the dynamics of relationships and team environments, clarifying the roots of both productive collaboration and recurring tensions. Each psychological type brings its own unique strengths, enriching interactions through a broad spectrum of perspectives. Yet, these differences can also become flashpoints for misunderstanding when individuals fail to acknowledge the validity of behaviors that differ from their own. A closer look at type dynamics helps explain why familiar relationship challenges often reappear in different settings, and why some teams naturally synchronize while others struggle with ongoing miscommunication and interpersonal friction. Understanding type differences can transform potential areas of conflict into opportunities for growth. When people learn to value the distinct perspectives each type offers, they can increase their effectiveness and forge stronger, more resilient connections. In romantic relationships, psychological opposites frequently attract, offering each partner qualities they may lack or have yet to develop in themselves. This attraction can create a sense of balance and stimulate personal development. For example, a reserved analytical thinker might be drawn to a warm, outgoing feeler who brings emotional depth and social energy to their world. In turn, the extroverted partner may find stability and insight in the inner clarity and logical reasoning of the introvert. However, these complementary traits can also become sources of frustration when expectations are not managed. Conflict often arises when one partner demands the other to change at a fundamental level, or when natural personality traits are misinterpreted as rejection or indifference. The long-term health of such relationships often depends on cultivating what Jung termed psychological generosity, a conscious willingness to affirm and support the other's innate way of being, even when it diverges sharply from one's own instincts. This approach requires communication that respects each partner's psychological style, rather than pressuring change that feels inauthentic. For instance, introverts often need time alone to reflect before expressing themselves, whereas extroverts process thoughts best through interaction and verbal exchange. When both partners understand and honor these core differences, they can shape a relationship dynamic that respects each person's needs, rather than settling for uneasy compromises that leave both feeling unfulfilled. The same principles apply within teams. Psychological diversity is not just beneficial, but essential for comprehensive decision-making and innovative problem-solving. Effective teams draw on a mix of thinkers who contribute objective analysis and feelers who ensure values and human considerations are not overlooked. Likewise, sensing types ground the team with attention to practical details, while intuitive types push boundaries with visionary ideas and strategic foresight. In contrast, homogeneous teams, composed of members with similar personality types, may excel in certain areas, but are prone to shared blind spots. These gaps can lead to one-sided decisions and overlooked opportunities. A strong grasp of type dynamics enables leaders to assign roles more thoughtfully, encourage a variety of perspectives, and reduce conflict that stems from misjudged personality traits rather than genuine disagreement. However, to use psychological typology effectively, one must move beyond superficial categorization. True understanding lies in recognizing and appreciating what each personality type uniquely contributes, without using typology as an excuse for inertia or resistance to growth. This deeper engagement allows individuals to recognize where they might benefit from others' strengths and where personal development is still needed. When applied with care and awareness, psychological type theory becomes a tool for fostering intentional, collaborative relationships, where differences become catalysts for insight rather than sources of friction. In both romantic and professional contexts, those who embrace these principles often experience more meaningful communication, fewer misunderstandings, and greater creative alignment. Ultimately, psychological differences need not be obstacles. They can be powerful assets. When acknowledged and integrated with intention, they enhance the strength and cohesion of any partnership or team. Part 17. Legacy, Contemporary Uses, and Integration. Carl Jung's influence on psychology, psychotherapy, and the broader comprehension of the human mind has endured far beyond his lifetime. His pioneering concepts, such as the unconscious, psychological types, archetypes, and individuation, continue to evolve, shaping numerous disciplines and leaving a profound mark on therapeutic approaches, educational systems, and organizational development worldwide. Modern Jungian practitioners have extended his original framework by incorporating insights from neuroscience, trauma research, and culturally diverse perspectives. This progression underscores the enduring relevance and adaptability of Jung's theories in exploring the depths of psychological growth and transformation. By emphasizing meaning, spiritual insight, and holistic healing, Jung offered a compelling alternative to reductionist or strictly clinical models of mental health. His ideas opened up new avenues for understanding well-being, approaches that embrace the full breadth and complexity of human experience. Tools like the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI, rooted in Jung's typological theory, have popularized his ideas across sectors such as business, education, and personal development, helping people understand themselves and interact more effectively with others. Although typological instruments like the MBTI may sometimes simplify Jung's nuanced model of personality, they have played an important role in fostering awareness of psychological diversity. These tools support more effective communication and teamwork by highlighting the different ways individuals think, process emotion, and relate to their environments. Contemporary expansions of typology have introduced cultural, developmental, and situational factors, deepening and refining the way personality is understood and applied in real-world contexts. The mainstream embrace of typological thinking has helped shift societal attitudes toward psychological differences, moving away from pathologizing cognitive and behavioral variants. Jung's investigations into trauma, complexes, and symbolic symptoms have significantly shaped modern integrative therapies and systemic approaches. His belief that symptoms carry inherent meaning and serve adaptive functions has contributed to the rise of collaborative, person-centered therapeutic practices that honor each client's inner resilience and potential for self-healing. Today, many clinicians incorporate Jungian tools such as active imagination, dream work, and creative expression to access layers of the psyche that might elude conventional talk therapy or cognitive methods. His view of therapy as a mutual journey of transformation continues to influence relational and humanistic schools of thought, where authentic connection and presence are valued as deeply as technical expertise. Beyond the clinical realm, Jungian thought has made its way into leadership training, organizational strategy, and social change initiatives. Understanding archetypes, projections, and collective psychological patterns enables leaders and innovators to address resistance and spark meaningful progress in group environments. Jung's contributions have become increasingly significant in areas such as ecological psychology, conflict resolution, and social equity, fields where unconscious dynamics shape collective behavior and must be addressed for real transformation to occur. The growing global interest in mindfulness, spiritual growth, and integrative development echoes Jung's early insistence that purely rational or materialistic paradigms fall short in meeting humanity's deeper existential needs. Perhaps one of Jung's most vital legacies is his demonstration that psychological science can coexist with awe and mystery, bridging empirical rigor with symbolic richness, therapeutic practice with spiritual depth, and individual evolution with social renewal. Jung offered a broad, inclusive vision of the human psyche, one that continues to hold significance in the face of today's increasingly complex challenges. As we navigate crises that demand both innovation and emotional intelligence, his teachings on consciousness, shadow integration, and the search for meaning provide crucial insight. In the end, Jung's idea of individuation, conceived not merely as personal development, but as a vital contribution to the evolution of humanity, remains a powerful source of inspiration. It reminds us that personal healing and growth are deeply interconnected with the world around us and can play an active role in building a more conscious, compassionate, and unified society. Part 18. The Unconscious. Carl Gustav Jung transformed modern psychology by illuminating the hidden layers of the human mind. Born in 1875 in a small Swiss village, Jung was profoundly affected by the strange and inexplicable events of his youth, experiences that sparked his enduring fascination with the unseen drivers of human thought and emotion. Although he began his professional journey in psychiatry, it was his collaboration with Sigmund Freud that initially brought him into the intellectual spotlight, with Freud even viewing Jung as the successor to his psychoanalytic legacy. Their partnership, however, unraveled by 1913 due to growing philosophical differences, particularly concerning the nature of the unconscious. Freud saw the unconscious primarily as a reservoir for suppressed desires, especially of a sexual or traumatic nature. Jung, on the other hand, believed it to be far more profound and multifaceted. He came to regard the unconscious not as a static repository of repressed material, but as an active, ever-evolving system engaged in a continuous dialogue with the conscious mind. Through extensive clinical work and introspection, Jung observed that his patients often described dream imagery, symbols, and inner experiences that bore no apparent relation to their personal lives. These recurring themes appeared across individuals from widely differing cultures and backgrounds, leading Jung to propose a revolutionary two-tiered model of the unconscious. The first of these levels, which Jung termed the personal unconscious, consists of thoughts, memories, and emotions that have slipped from conscious awareness. These include forgotten experiences, repressed feelings, unresolved conflicts, and ideas once dismissed or buried due to discomfort. Jung compared it to a vast mental archive where everything we have encountered, regardless of whether we remember it, remains stored. These latent contents continue to shape our behavior, often emerging unexpectedly through emotional triggers, automatic responses, or subtle preferences that seem to lack a clear origin. Jung's most transformative idea, however, was his discovery of a deeper stratum beneath the personal layer, the collective unconscious. Unlike the personal unconscious, which is shaped by an individual's life experiences, the collective unconscious is a universal psychological inheritance shared by all humans. Jung found that certain themes, images, and behavioral patterns appeared consistently across disparate cultures and historical periods. This striking universality suggested a source deeper than cultural transmission or personal experience, an innate structure of the psyche common to the entire human species. At the heart of the collective unconscious lie what Jung called archetypes, fundamental symbols and motifs that express core elements of human existence. These archetypes include figures and narratives such as the nurturing mother, the wise old man, the cycle of birth and death, and the hero's transformative journey. Jung believed these timeless patterns explained why cultures across the world developed similar mythologies, dream imagery, and religious symbols. For example, the image of the mother appears globally, in Christianity's Virgin Mary, in Hinduism's goddess Parvati, and in ancient Earth Mother deities from prehistoric traditions. These archetypal elements naturally surface in dreams, religious experiences, artistic creations, and mythic storytelling. Jung saw them as expressions of the mind's deep architecture, blueprints embedded within the human psyche. By recognizing and engaging with these universal symbols, individuals could uncover new meaning in their personal struggles and connect with a broader human legacy. Jung believed that such awareness could offer profound psychological insight and even spiritual healing. He also recognized that the unconscious communicates with the conscious self through a rich symbolic language. Dreams, spontaneous mental images, internal fantasies, and even emotional disturbances all serve as messages from this deeper realm. These symbols are not arbitrary. They are deliberate expressions designed to restore internal equilibrium and promote growth. Whereas Freud interpreted dreams primarily as expressions of hidden wishes, Jung viewed them as corrective in nature, offering perspectives and wisdom that the conscious mind lacks and pointing toward psychological integration. To Jung, the unconscious was far more than a chaotic storehouse of forgotten thoughts. He believed it embodied a type of inner intelligence, sometimes more insightful than conscious reasoning, and that it held the key to resolving challenges that logic alone could not unravel. By cultivating a relationship with this inner source, a person could embark on the lifelong process Jung called individuation, a path toward personal wholeness, deeper self-awareness, and harmony between the inner self and the external world. Part 19. Psychic Energy. Carl Jung revolutionized psychological thought by suggesting that the mind operates as a dynamic energy system, governed by principles analogous to those found in physics. Central to his theory was the concept of libido, not merely as sexual energy, but as a broader form of psychic vitality that circulates throughout the mind, much like electricity flows through a circuit. In contrast to Sigmund Freud, who limited the meaning of libido to sexual drives, Jung expanded the term to encompass a universal life force. This energy, he proposed, fuels a wide spectrum of human activities, ranging from creative pursuits and spiritual exploration to intellectual inquiry and emotional connection. Psychic energy, in Jung's model, is always in motion, shifting among various psychological components and shaping the ever-evolving landscape of thought and behavior. A central idea in Jung's theory is the principle of compensation. This principle suggests that whenever the conscious personality becomes overly one-sided or rigid, the unconscious mind responds with counterbalancing influences. For example, someone who relies heavily on logic while suppressing their emotional side may begin to experience dreams or inner images that reintroduce those neglected emotional elements. This compensatory mechanism serves to preserve psychological balance, ensuring that no single function dominates at the expense of others. The movement of energy within the psyche also leads to the emergence of what Jung termed complexes, emotionally charged groupings of thoughts, memories, and feelings that operate semi-independently within the overall personality. These complexes can consume large amounts of psychic energy, often triggering intense emotional reactions, repetitive thoughts, or compulsive behaviors. When energy becomes fixated within a complex, it typically indicates unresolved psychological material that requires conscious attention and integration. Understanding the flow of psychic energy offers insight into why certain experiences elicit disproportionate emotional reactions, or why individuals may fixate on particular people, ideas, or memories. Jung observed that psychic energy does not progress in a linear fashion. Instead, it moves in rhythmic cycles, alternating between two distinct modes, progressive and regressive. In progressive phases, energy is directed outward, supporting the individual's ambitions, social roles, and engagement with the external world. During regressive periods, however, energy retreats inward, drawing the person's focus away from external tasks and toward the contents of the unconscious. These inner-focused phases often bring forth childhood memories, primal images, and archetypal themes. Importantly, Jung did not view regression as pathological. Rather, he considered it a necessary and enriching process, one that reconnects the individual with deeper psychological layers that are rich with creative potential, wisdom, and restorative power. This energetic model also explains the phenomenon of inflation, which occurs when a person becomes overly identified with a potent archetypal force. When someone unconsciously merges with an archetype, such as the hero, the sage, or the ruler, they may begin to exhibit exaggerated self-confidence and act as though they possess extraordinary authority or insight. Inflation is particularly dangerous because archetypal energies are collective, not individual. When these immense forces enter the personal psyche unfiltered, they can distort the ego, producing illusions of grandeur and a loss of self-awareness. Jung emphasized the importance of recognizing the autonomous nature of archetypes. By acknowledging their distinct and impersonal origins, individuals can guard against being overwhelmed by them and maintain a healthy separation between the ego and the collective unconscious. Part 20. Psychological Types. Carl Jung arrived at his theory of psychological types through years of clinical observation and intense self-examination. Over time, he became acutely aware of the fundamental differences in how people experience the world and respond to it. From these insights, he introduced two core attitude types that determine the direction of a person's mental and emotional focus: extraversion and introversion. Though these terms have become common in everyday conversation, their original meanings in Jung's work are often misinterpreted. Jung did not regard extraversion and introversion as rigid personality traits, but rather as overarching psychological orientations. They describe where a person's mental energy naturally flows. In the case of the extroverted attitude, that energy is directed outward, toward people, external events, and physical activity. People who are extroverted typically feel invigorated by external interaction. They seek out stimulation through engaging with others and their environment, and they are more likely to base their decisions on what's happening around them. Extroverts tend to verbalize their thoughts freely, process experiences through active dialogue, and act decisively without extended internal deliberation. Although they are often seen as outgoing and expressive, they may struggle with solitude and tend to shy away from deep internal analysis. Introversion, on the other hand, channels energy inward, toward inner thoughts, emotions, and personal reflection. Individuals with an introverted orientation are usually most energized by time alone. They prefer to think things through before sharing their ideas, and often weigh internal reactions more heavily than external circumstances. Introverts commonly need quiet time to recover after social interactions, and they are comfortable with extended periods of reflection. They're frequently viewed as thoughtful and self-contained, though they may find spontaneous or high-energy group situations overwhelming. Jung asserted that these orientations are largely inborn and remain relatively stable over a person's lifetime. While it's possible to cultivate the opposite attitude, most people maintain a dominant preference. The less developed orientation often resides in the unconscious, which can lead to psychological imbalances. When this occurs, the unconscious may express itself through dreams, emotional responses, or attractions that represent the suppressed side. Such experiences serve as a form of internal correction, prompting individuals to engage with the parts of themselves they typically overlook. By recognizing these core psychological attitudes, we can better understand common points of friction in communication and collaboration. Extroverts and introverts often differ significantly in how they relate to others and approach decisions, leading to frequent misunderstandings without awareness of these differences. Jung also observed that people vary not only in their orientation, but in the ways they perceive the world and evaluate their experiences. Some individuals are grounded in sensory perception, relying on tangible facts and concrete data. Others are more intuitive, drawn to patterns, symbols, and abstract possibilities. Similarly, decision-making can be guided by impersonal logic and objective criteria, or by an emphasis on personal values and the emotional consequences of one's actions. These preferences for perceiving information and making judgments are essential components of Jung's broader theory of psychological types. When combined with the attitudes of extraversion and introversion, they offer a comprehensive framework for understanding individual differences in how people think, feel, work, and relate to others. Part 21. The Four Psychological Functions. Carl Jung identified four essential psychological functions that govern how we perceive the world and make decisions. These functions act as inner tools, each offering a unique perspective that shapes our engagement with reality and enriches our understanding of life. Although everyone has access to all four functions, Jung observed that individuals typically develop one or two more strongly than the others. The functions that receive less attention often remain underdeveloped and unconscious. This imbalance can lead to both strengths and limitations, influencing how people think, act, and interact with the world around them. Thinking is the function that processes information through logical analysis and objective reasoning. Individuals who lead with this function value structure, clarity, and empirical evidence. They tend to base their decisions on what is logically sound and factually accurate, often setting aside emotional or social considerations. Those who favor the thinking function excel at breaking down problems, designing systems, and managing complex tasks. However, they may find it difficult to navigate emotional subtleties or gauge the human impact of their choices. While they might appear emotionally detached, their commitment to fairness and reason allows them to stay grounded and principled in difficult situations. In contrast, feeling evaluates experiences through emotional resonance and personal values. People who primarily use this function are guided by what feels ethically right and by their concern for how decisions affect others. They are often skilled in understanding emotional currents, creating rapport, and promoting interpersonal harmony. These individuals tend to be deeply attuned to human motivations and excel at maintaining emotional balance within groups. Yet, they may struggle with impersonal analysis or decisions that conflict with their values. Feeling dominant personalities are typically seen as warm and genuine, and their value-driven approach helps them form meaningful connections and nurture community cohesion. Sensation is rooted in direct sensory experience and a focus on present realities. Those who rely on this function prefer dealing with observable facts and practical matters over abstract concepts or speculative thinking. They are attentive to detail, hands-on in their approach, and adept at resolving immediate, real-world problems. People who lead with sensation often come across as practical, grounded, and efficient. Their strong connection to the physical environment equips them for roles that require precision and timely action. However, they may find it challenging to engage with theoretical frameworks or to plan far into the future. Intuition, by contrast, focuses on what lies beneath the surface, patterns, possibilities, and deeper meanings not yet revealed. Intuitive individuals are drawn to the abstract and often prioritize what could be over what currently is. They are imaginative, visionary, and especially sensitive to emerging trends and hidden connections. Those with a dominant intuitive function are often recognized for their originality and insight. They flourish in settings that demand big-picture thinking and creative exploration. Still, they may struggle with attention to detail or consistency in follow-through. Their strengths lie in innovation and foresight, allowing them to generate ideas that can shape future directions. Jung noted that these functions are naturally grouped into opposing pairs, thinking versus feeling, and sensation versus intuition. Each pair reflects a fundamental duality within the human psyche. To reconcile these inner tensions, Jung proposed the concept of the transcendent function, a dynamic psychological process that unites opposing forces within the mind. The transcendent function emerges through meaningful engagement between conscious thought and unconscious content, creating a space for new insights that surpass the limitations of any one perspective. Developing this integrative process is key to personal transformation as it helps individuals resolve inner conflicts and adopt more holistic, adaptive ways of living. Part 22. Complexes. One of Carl Jung's most profound contributions to depth psychology was his discovery of psychological complexes. By employing innovative word association experiments, Jung noticed that particular words provoked delayed reactions, heightened emotional responses, or lapses in recall, indicators that certain self-governing psychological systems were operating beneath conscious awareness. These complexes function almost like independent sub-personalities, each carrying its own emotional charge, distinct memories, and behavioral tendencies. In certain situations, a complex can rise to the forefront of consciousness, temporarily shaping a person's thoughts, feelings, and actions. Jung determined that everyone possesses multiple complexes, and that understanding them is critical for achieving psychological balance and personal development. A complex forms when emotionally charged experiences, thoughts, and associations organize themselves around a core archetypal image. Consider the example of the mother complex. It may consist of personal memories of one's biological mother, societal notions of motherhood, and the archetypal image of the Great Mother embedded in the collective unconscious. When this complex is activated, an individual might respond to people or situations as though they were dealing with their mother, regardless of the actual context. What gives complexes their psychological weight is their autonomy. They follow their own internal logic and, when triggered, can override rational thought. Jung observed that many complexes originate in early childhood, where emotionally powerful experiences become intertwined with universal archetypal motifs. A child who endures emotional neglect, for instance, may develop a complex centered around themes of rejection and unworthiness, which can continue to shape their adult relationships and worldview. Complexes act like psychological magnets, attracting similar experiences and interpreting ambiguous situations in ways that reinforce their internal narrative. Becoming aware of one's personal complexes helps explain why certain interactions provoke unusually strong emotional reactions, or why recurring relational patterns persist despite conscious efforts to change. Complexes often manifest through mechanisms such as projection, where individuals unconsciously attribute the emotional content of their own complexes to others. For example, someone with an unresolved father complex might perceive authority figures either as idealized mentors or as threatening figures of control, depending on how the complex has developed. They may also appear through psychological inflation, where a person becomes overwhelmed by archetypal material and loses a grounded sense of self. A person caught in a savior complex, for instance, may believe they are destined to rescue others, adopting a grandiose or messianic stance in their relationships. To work with complexes effectively, Jung stressed the need to cultivate what he called conscious realization, the ability to recognize when a complex has been activated and to distinguish its influence from responses grounded in present moment awareness. To support this process, Jung developed therapeutic techniques such as active imagination, and dream analysis, which allow individuals to engage with these inner structures and bring their unconscious material into the light of consciousness. Importantly, Jung did not advocate for the eradication of complexes. He viewed such an effort as both unrealistic and counterproductive. Instead, the goal is to build a conscious and constructive relationship with them. When acknowledged and integrated, complexes can become valuable sources of emotional richness, creative insight, and psychological vitality. Rather than remaining disruptive forces that perpetuate inner conflict and suffering, they can evolve into meaningful aspects of one's inner life, contributing to personal growth and transformation. Part 23. The Individuation Process. Carl Jung regarded individuation as the heart of psychological development and the ultimate goal of analytical psychology. This lifelong endeavor involves gradually becoming conscious of and uniting the many layers of the psyche to form a unified and genuine self. Unlike simple ego formation, which often centers around adapting to external expectations and social norms, individuation requires a deep engagement with the unconscious, even when it challenges our conscious self-image or long-held beliefs. Rather than staying at the level of superficial adjustments, individuation calls for sincere self-examination and the willingness to confront difficult internal realities. Jung believed that while individuation unfolds naturally over a lifetime, it also demands active participation and a strong sense of personal accountability. This transformative inner work frequently begins in midlife, a phase when many start reassessing the ideals, goals, and values that previously provided their lives with meaning. Jung observed that individuals in their 30s or 40s often experience a psychological crossroads. Despite achieving outward success, they may feel a profound sense of dissatisfaction or emptiness, leading them to question their life's direction. Emotional struggles such as anxiety, depression, strained personal connections, or existential fatigue can surface, signs that, in Jung's view, stem from the unconscious and signal a deeper need for integration and authenticity. One of the first major steps in this process is the retraction of psychological projections. Individuals must begin to identify the parts of themselves they have unconsciously projected onto others, whether people, ideologies, or social institutions. This phase includes facing the shadow, which consists of those suppressed aspects of the personality that conflict with the individual's conscious identity and have been buried in the unconscious. A further vital component of individuation is reconciling the inner opposites that exist within the psyche. Jung illustrated this using the ideas of the Anima in men and the Animus in women, representations of the unconscious, complementary qualities that balance out the dominant conscious traits. By recognizing and integrating these inner counterparts, individuals move toward a more complex and complete sense of identity. As individuation progresses, the individual's relationship to the ego begins to change. The ego, once viewed as the chief organizer of the personality, must gradually yield to a deeper and more comprehensive center of awareness, the self. This self arises through the synthesis of conscious knowledge and unconscious insight. This shift in orientation can lead to temporary confusion and emotional upheaval as familiar aspects of the identity dissolve and new ones have yet to take shape. Jung likened this transformative phase to the alchemical processes of dissolution and regeneration, a symbolic death of the old self to make room for a more authentic and integrated identity. The purpose of individuation, however, is not to achieve some idealized state of perfection, but rather to embrace wholeness, a state that includes one's imperfections, contradictions, and the inherent suffering of human existence. Along this journey, individuals often cultivate what Jung termed a religious attitude, not necessarily aligned with formal religion, but marked by a deep sense of respect for life and an awareness of something greater than the personal ego. This perspective allows them to hold conflicting truths in tension and to remain present with inner discord rather than seeking simplistic resolutions or avoiding discomfort. In the end, individuation nurtures a deepened appreciation for the complexity and richness of human experience. Jung insisted that this process is never truly complete. It remains an ongoing journey of personal evolution, inner discovery, and psychological integration that spans the entirety of one's life. Part 24. The Self-Archetype. Carl Jung's most significant contribution to understanding the human psyche was his concept of the self. While the ego governs our conscious awareness and decision-making, the self represents the totality of the psyche, encompassing both conscious and unconscious elements, and acts as the central organizing principle that gives coherence to the whole personality. Jung regarded the self as both the final destination of the individuation journey and the mysterious inner force that steers psychological development. It does not emerge in a sudden revelation, but unfolds gradually, becoming more visible as a person integrates disparate aspects of their psyche and moves closer to discovering their true essence. The self tends to reveal itself through symbolic imagery that surfaces in conscious experience. These symbols often carry a deep emotional resonance, evoking a sense of unity, purpose, and transcendence. Common manifestations include symmetrical or geometric figures, like mandalas, circles, and squares, as well as powerful archetypal images such as wise elders, spiritual figures, or mythic beings who embody ultimate authority and insight. Jung noticed that individuals in the midst of profound inner transformation frequently feel compelled to draw circular forms or gravitate toward spiritual symbols that reflect harmony and completeness. Such images typically appear in dreams, through imaginative exploration, or within creative work, all serving as expressions of the psyche's effort to portray its foundational source of order. As the individuation process advances, the dynamic between the ego and the self is reshaped in significant ways. During the early stages of life, the ego often assumes it is the dominant force in the personality, making choices driven by personal desires, cultural conditioning, and rational analysis. But as deeper psychological integration takes place, the ego gradually comes to recognize the deeper wisdom of the self, an inner guide that offers insight beyond the limitations of ordinary consciousness and points toward a more meaningful existence. This transformation requires the ego to surrender its illusion of control and embrace what Jung described as a religious attitude, a stance of humility and reverence before forces greater than the ego's will. Jung emphasized that the self frequently communicates through synchronicity, those uncanny coincidences that suggest a hidden design or intelligence operating behind life's apparent randomness. People often realize, in retrospect, that significant life events seem to follow an inner pattern, as if subtly orchestrated by a guiding presence beyond conscious awareness. Another way the self expresses itself is through what Jung called the transcendent function, a psychological mechanism that unites opposites within the personality and gives rise to fresh insights and creative resolutions to internal tensions. These experiences point to a form of guidance that exceeds the ego's capabilities, suggesting that a more expansive intelligence is actively shaping the path toward wholeness. When the self becomes a consciously felt reality, not just a concept, but a living experience, it signifies the culmination of individuation and the emergence of psychological maturity. Those who form a conscious relationship with the self tend to exude a calm inner strength and quiet confidence that isn't dependent on outward achievement or validation. Such individuals make courageous decisions based on inner integrity rather than social expectations. They are able to tolerate complexity and inner conflict without losing their balance. Jung was clear that becoming aware of the self does not shield one from life's hardships, but it does offer a stable inner foundation from which to meet those challenges, with clarity, compassion, and a deep allegiance to one's true nature. Part 25. The Shadow. Among Carl Jung's most significant and socially impactful insights into human psychology is his concept of the shadow. This archetype encompasses the aspects of our personality, impulses, traits, and desires that we reject or find unacceptable. These disowned elements are not erased, but instead are pushed into the depths of the unconscious mind, forming a hidden counterpart to the public-facing self we show to the world, known as the persona. Though the shadow often includes what we consider negative characteristics, such as hostility, selfish drives, or primitive impulses, it is not wholly negative. It also contains positive qualities and untapped capacities that conflict with societal expectations or our idealized self-concept. Jung emphasized that every person possesses a shadow, and achieving genuine psychological health involves facing and integrating these repressed parts, not pretending they don't exist. The formation of the shadow begins early in life. As children are shaped by their environment, they come to understand, both explicitly and through subtle social cues from authority figures and peers, what behaviors are welcomed and which are frowned upon. In striving to be accepted, children gradually develop a socially acceptable identity, or persona, while simultaneously pushing traits deemed undesirable out of awareness and into the unconscious, where they coalesce into the shadow. While this division is necessary for navigating social life, it creates an internal split that may cause psychological conflict if the shadow remains unacknowledged. What gets repressed into the shadow is largely determined by cultural values, family dynamics, and individual upbringing, which is why the shadow's content varies greatly between different people and groups. One of the most common ways the shadow surfaces is through projection. This occurs when individuals unknowingly assign their own suppressed traits to others. For example, a person who has repressed their own anger or competitiveness might perceive those traits excessively in others, reacting with exaggerated disapproval to behaviors that are relatively harmless. On a collective level, entire societies can project their disowned aspects onto marginalized communities, which fuels prejudice, discrimination, and social conflict. Jung observed that the qualities we condemn most forcefully in others often mirror parts of ourselves we're unwilling to acknowledge. Our dreams can serve as an entry point into this hidden realm. Dreams that involve unsettling characters, such as dark figures, criminals, wild animals, or same-gendered strangers, often embody the shadow. These figures may pursue, threaten, or confront the dreamer, symbolizing an internal struggle to confront and accept one's denied traits. Rather than avoiding or suppressing these dream figures, Jung advocated for actively engaging with them. These images carry intense psychological energy and, when embraced, can be transformed into valuable allies within the psyche. Methods like active imagination allow individuals to enter into dialogue with these inner figures, helping them to evolve from threatening enemies into integrated parts of a more complete self. Confronting the shadow requires courage and unflinching honesty, as it entails acknowledging aspects of oneself that may clash with personal ideals or moral beliefs. However, Jung found that this process does not damage the self. It enhances it. By integrating the shadow, individuals can access deeper reservoirs of energy, creativity, and authenticity. Those who manage to bring significant portions of their shadow into conscious awareness often emerge with greater emotional depth, vitality, and resilience. They also tend to develop a more compassionate and humble perspective, both toward themselves and toward the flaws of others. Jung cautioned that efforts to purge the shadow entirely do not lead to moral purity, but to psychological distortion and increased susceptibility to unconscious impulses. In contrast, conscious integration enables people to harness the shadow's power in constructive ways, without falling under its control. Part 26. The Anima and Animus. Carl Jung proposed that within each person exists an unconscious counterpart to their conscious gender identity, an internal opposite that acts as a gateway between the conscious self and the unconscious psyche. For men, this inner feminine aspect is known as the anima, while in women, the corresponding masculine component is called the animus. These inner archetypes are not merely reflections of social or cultural gender roles. Instead, they represent deeply rooted psychological potentials, emotional dimensions, and spiritual capacities that complement and complete the conscious personality. Integrating these contrasexual aspects is essential to achieving inner wholeness and cultivating emotionally mature, meaningful connections with both others and oneself. In men, the anima often embodies qualities that society tends to undervalue in males, such as emotional depth, sensitivity, and intuition. She typically emerges as a symbolic figure in dreams and inner experiences, taking the form of a mysterious woman, a seductive muse, or a spiritual guide, all of which invite the man to explore his emotional and intuitive nature more fully. When the anima remains unconscious, a man may unknowingly project her qualities onto the women in his life, expecting them to fulfill emotional and spiritual needs he has not developed within himself. This can lead to unrealistic expectations and relational discord, as no real woman can perfectly mirror the depth of his unacknowledged inner world. For women, the animus symbolizes traits often discouraged by conventional ideas of femininity, such as logic, assertiveness, and inner authority. He may appear in dreams as a commanding figure, such as a teacher, warrior, or spiritual leader, reflecting a woman's potential for rational thought, conviction, and independent action. When the animus is not brought into conscious awareness, a woman might find herself dominated by rigid thinking, excessive criticism, or an over-reliance on intellect at the expense of emotional nuance. Alternatively, she may project her animus onto men, seeking from them the mental strength or moral direction that remains unacknowledged within her own psyche. Jung described this unconscious merging of self and projected archetype as participation mystique, a state in which personal boundaries blur and the individual becomes entangled in another's psychological field. Under such projections, people may fall into intense infatuation, idealize their partners, or form emotionally dependent bonds that bear little resemblance to the actual person involved. Eventually, the illusion breaks down when the other cannot live up to the projected ideal. As the projection fades, the person begins to perceive the partner more clearly, often leading to disappointment, conflict, or a painful disillusionment. This psychological mechanism helps explain why romantic relationships can start with passionate idealism and gradually shift into more grounded, sometimes disheartening, realities. The path to integrating the anima or animus involves consciously engaging with these inner figures. This can be done through methods such as analyzing dreams, practicing active imagination, and reclaiming qualities previously assigned to others. As men begin to relate to their anima, they often grow in emotional intelligence, creative expression, and spiritual insight, all without compromising their masculinity. Similarly, women who integrate the animus tend to develop stronger intellectual confidence, assertiveness, and self-determination, while maintaining emotional awareness and the capacity for deep relationships. Jung emphasized that this process does not erase the inherent differences between masculine and feminine energies. Rather, it fosters psychological maturity by enabling individuals to access a fuller range of inner resources throughout their lives. Part 27. Synchronicity. Synchronicity remains one of Carl Jung's most intriguing and controversial concepts. His investigation into the phenomenon of meaningful coincidences that seem to connect internal psychological states with external events through invisible, non-causal links. He defined synchronicity as the occurrence of events in the outer world that meaningfully coincide with a person's inner experience, without a direct cause and effect relationship to explain them. Such experiences often arise during periods of emotional turmoil or major psychological transformation, moments when individuals face life-altering choices or undergo deep personal change. Jung believed these occurrences point to a hidden, organizing intelligence embedded within the fabric of the universe, one that subtly binds consciousness and matter in ways that transcend conventional understanding. Jung's interest in synchronicity grew out of his work as a psychotherapist. He repeatedly observed that patients undergoing intense psychological shifts would encounter strange coincidences that seemed to reflect their inner struggles. Someone grappling with issues of vulnerability and trust might unexpectedly meet strangers who confide deeply personal stories. Similarly, an individual confronting their own darker impulses might begin noticing repeated references to themes of crime or moral conflict in books, films, or casual conversations. These coincidences often carry symbolic weight, resonating with the individual's psychological state as if the world around them is mirroring their inner reality. While Jung initially approached these events with skepticism, he eventually recognized their significance and came to view them as manifestations of a deeper phenomenon deserving of serious attention. Synchronicity poses a direct challenge to the dominant worldview of Western science, which insists that all phenomena must be explained through linear, mechanical causality. In contrast, Jung proposed the idea of a causal connecting principle, a way of understanding that some events are meaningfully linked not through cause, but through symbolic or psychological resonance. This principle, like the archetypes within the collective unconscious, suggests that meaning itself can forge connections between mind and matter. Jung theorized that both consciousness and the physical world are expressions of a deeper, unified reality, one that occasionally reveals itself through synchronistic events, linking subjective experience with objective reality in profound ways. He also observed that synchronistic events tend to occur more frequently when individuals are particularly attuned to the unconscious, or when they are immersed in emotionally charged experiences. People engaged in deep therapy, artists in the throes of creative inspiration, or those navigating critical life transitions often report a heightened occurrence of such meaningful coincidences. These events frequently carry insight, warning, or affirmation regarding the path they are on. Such experiences can feel like whispers from a wiser, unseen intelligence, one that holds a broader vision of a person's life journey than the conscious mind can perceive. Jung emphasized that synchronicity cannot be artificially invoked. It emerges naturally when the inner psyche and external circumstances converge in just the right way to allow it. The true power of synchronicity lies not in its ability to forecast the future or exert control over events, but in its capacity to bring meaning, clarity, and orientation, particularly during periods of ambiguity or upheaval. When people learn to recognize and honor these moments, they often discover a deeper sense of connection to a larger, more mysterious order that transcends their immediate situation. This alignment offers reassurance amid uncertainty and fosters a trust in the unfolding of life, even when rational analysis provides no clear direction. For Jung, becoming aware of synchronicity was part of embracing what he called a religious attitude, a willingness to engage with life as a mystery rich with depth, meaning, and unseen intelligence beyond the grasp of logic alone. Part 28. Alchemy and Psychology. Carl Jung's extensive engagement with medieval alchemical writings provided him with a rich symbolic framework that allowed him to articulate the complexities of psychological transformation and individuation, concepts that often eluded the precision of standard psychological terminology. After years of difficulty in expressing the nuanced processes of inner growth, Jung recognized that the symbolic language found in alchemical manuscripts closely mirrored the psychological transformations he observed both in his patients and within his own psyche. He interpreted the alchemist's quest to transmute base metals into gold as a profound metaphor for the evolution of unconscious material into conscious awareness. This metaphor for transformation paralleled the process of psychological integration, wherein disparate elements of the psyche are synthesized into what Jung called the self, a complete and harmonious whole. This realization offered Jung not only a form of external validation for his psychological theories, but also a cohesive symbolic language through which he could map the stages of inner development. The imagery and structure of alchemical operations, such as dissolution, purification, and recombination, echoed the natural unfolding of the individuation process. The initial phase in this symbolic journey, referred to as nigredo or blackening, signified the confrontation with the shadow side of the psyche and the breakdown of obsolete or limiting mental structures, often accompanied by confusion, despair, and identity dissolution. This phase represented, for Jung, a necessary psychological crisis, an essential gateway to renewal and rebirth. Emerging from the darkness of the nigredo is the stage of albedo, or whitening, which reflects the purification and illumination of consciousness. Here, clarity begins to emerge, and the psyche integrates more refined content. This is followed by the rubedo, or reddening, which denotes the final stage of transformation, the full realization of the self, and the achievement of psychological wholeness. Alchemical texts, in Jung's view, offer detailed symbolic guidance for navigating the internal tensions, contradictions, and challenges encountered on the path of individuation. A recurring motif in alchemy, the union of opposites, often represented as the sacred conjunction of king and queen or the image of the hermaphrodite, resonated deeply with Jung's concept of integrating polarized elements within the psyche, the masculine and the feminine, the conscious and the unconscious, the spiritual and the material. The alchemist's patient and methodical approach to transformation echoed Jung's belief that meaningful psychological change cannot be rushed. He was critical of superficial solutions or quick fixes, advocating instead for a respectful, organic engagement with the psyche's natural rhythm. The cryptic and symbolic nature of alchemical procedures further confirmed his insight that true transformation frequently involves unconscious forces that cannot be fully understood through logic or controlled by reason alone. Jung's exploration of alchemy revealed that the human drive for psychological growth has deep historical foundations. Although couched in esoteric and symbolic language, the essential processes described by alchemists were unmistakably psychological in nature. While the alchemists worked with physical substances in their laboratories, Jung saw these experiments as outward expressions of inward psychological operations. The materials and methods served as metaphors for internal dynamics, undergoing exploration and integration. He also recognized that mystical, religious, and esoteric traditions across cultures had long employed symbolic language to describe inner transformation. This led him to see the individuation process not as a modern psychological construct, but as a universal and timeless human journey. This continuity across cultures and epochs gave Jung greater assurance that his theories were not merely the product of personal reflection or cultural conditioning, but manifestations of fundamental truths about the human condition. In addition, Jung's study of alchemical thought underscored the importance of what he termed participation mystique, a deep psychological entanglement between the subject and the object of observation. Alchemists believed that the success of their experiments was intimately linked to their own inner psychological state, recognizing that the work of transformation demanded full personal involvement rather than detached observation. This insight paralleled Jung's own approach to psychotherapy, which emphasized that healing arises not from cold analysis, but from a genuine, dynamic relationship between therapist and patient. For Jung, psychological transformation required emotional engagement and the active presence of both participants. It was not a process that could unfold through objective observation alone. Alchemy, then, offered Jung a model of inquiry that harmonized the empirical with the mystical. It acknowledged the measurable aspects of psychological work while also honoring the ineffable dimensions of human transformation. This integrated vision affirmed Jung's belief that some elements of the psyche defy rational explanation, but are no less real or essential because of that. Part 29. Religious Experience, Spirituality, and the Psyche. Carl Jung's exploration of religion and spirituality represents one of the most nuanced and frequently debated elements of his intellectual and personal life. Although he came from a family deeply rooted in Protestant clerical tradition, Jung found himself at odds with conventional Christian doctrines from an early age. This inner conflict drove him to pursue a richer, psychologically grounded understanding of the spiritual dimension. Over the course of his career, Jung maintained a steadfast commitment to analyzing spiritual experience through the framework of analytical psychology. He deliberately avoided reducing such experiences to pathology or trivializing them as delusions or escapist tendencies. A critical part of his distinction lay in separating organized religion from what he termed religiosity, an inherent psychological inclination to seek meaning, connection, and a sense of the sacred beyond the personal ego. Jung viewed spiritual experience not as a sign of psychological weakness or regression, but as a vital component of mental and emotional maturation. He frequently encountered clients whose distress was not rooted in neurosis or disorder in the clinical sense, but in an existential or spiritual void, a lack of direction, significance, or unity with something beyond the self. In numerous instances, Jung observed that individuals who experienced genuine spiritual breakthroughs or inner transformations often reported profound psychological improvements. These recoveries frequently defied explanation through conventional therapeutic models, leading him to propose that the psyche is naturally oriented toward the sacred. He referred to this orientation as the numinous, those extraordinary experiences that inspire reverence, awe, and a profound sense of connection to ultimate reality. He argued that ignoring this spiritual component of human nature contributes to fragmentation within the psyche and can give rise to various emotional and mental health challenges. To articulate the architecture of religious experience, Jung introduced the concept of the self-archetype, an inner symbol of unity, wholeness, and inner divinity. Jung observed that the symbolic imagery and emotional resonance accompanying the journey toward psychological wholeness often mirrored those found in traditional spiritual or religious encounters. He suggested that authentic experiences of the divine were commonly mediated through the self-archetype, not as encounters with an external deity, but as deep engagements with the innermost layers of the psyche, where the divine is symbolically represented. This perspective enabled Jung to validate religious experiences from a psychological standpoint without relinquishing scientific rigor. Rather than dismissing these phenomena as hallucinations or mere wish fulfillment, he interpreted them as essential expressions of the psyche's intrinsic drive toward unity, meaning, and inner harmony. Jung placed strong emphasis on personal spiritual discovery over strict adherence to religious dogma or institutional belief systems. He encouraged individuals to develop their connection to the sacred through introspection, engagement with dreams, meaningful coincidences, synchronicities, and symbolic interpretations arising from the unconscious, rather than through rigid theological frameworks. For Jung, authentic spiritual development required the same depth of introspective effort as the process of individuation, the lifelong psychological journey toward self-integration. This journey demanded confronting one's own darkness, reconciling inner contradictions, and facing the limitations of one's persona with sincerity and self-awareness. Unlike religious systems that emphasize moral purity, perfection, or idealized behavior, Jung championed a more inclusive approach, one that embraced the full range of human experience, including its ambiguities and imperfections. His recognition of the psychological core of spiritual life had far-reaching implications not only for individual growth, but also for the therapeutic process. Jung contended that many psychological afflictions are fundamentally spiritual in nature, and that meaningful healing must address the person's deep need for purpose, significance, and connection to something beyond the self. Yet he also warned against the dangers of spiritual practices that neglect psychological insight. Without grounded self-awareness, such pursuits can lead to ego inflation, misguided projections, and various forms of avoidance that mask as enlightenment. These spiritual distortions, Jung cautioned, can intensify internal conflict and hinder genuine growth. By bridging the domains of psychology and spirituality, Jung articulated a pathway toward personal integration that honored both empirical inquiry and the timeless human yearning for transcendence. His legacy continues to shape how we understand the interplay between inner transformation and spiritual awareness, demonstrating how each can deepen and inform the other. Part 30. Mythology, Fairy Tales, and Collective Symbols. Carl Jung's investigation into mythology and fairy tales was central to advancing his concept of the collective unconscious. Through this body of work, he identified psychological patterns that repeat across human stories, regardless of the time period or geographical location in which they appear. What struck him most was that similar themes, characters, and storylines emerged even in cultures that had no known interaction, suggesting these motifs originated not from shared cultural influences, but from universal psychological structures embedded in the human mind. These timeless narratives serve as symbolic blueprints, offering profound insight into fundamental aspects of human life, such as navigating adolescence, falling in love, enduring hardship, or searching for meaning and identity. Jung viewed myths and fairy tales as collective expressions of the human psyche, dreamlike creations that encode and preserve essential psychological truths across generations. Fairy tales, in particular, held a special significance for Jung. He regarded them as the purest and most straightforward expressions of archetypal themes. Unlike myths, which are often intertwined with historical, religious, or cultural complexities, fairy tales deliver their symbolic messages with clarity and simplicity. Most often, they revolve around a youthful hero or heroine who leaves their familiar world, faces a series of tests, receives supernatural assistance, and ultimately undergoes a profound inner transformation leading to maturity and completeness. This narrative arc mirrors what Jung termed the process of individuation, a journey toward achieving psychological wholeness. Fairy tales, in his view, illustrate this internal evolution in a symbolic form, offering a framework for understanding the personal trials and inner growth each individual must navigate. Because the symbolic language in these stories speaks directly to the unconscious, they can reveal emotional truths that often elude the conscious, analytical mind. Jung's study of symbolic imagery revealed that archetypes function on multiple levels: personal, cultural, and universal. A single symbol might hold different meanings depending on the context. For example, the image of a tree might represent personal development to an individual, signify ecological harmony within a cultural setting, and simultaneously express a deeper universal archetype, the axis mundi, the sacred center that connects the heavens and the earth. He observed that authentic symbols cannot be fabricated by will or reason. Instead, they surface spontaneously from the unconscious when the inner conditions are right. These genuine symbols carry what Jung described as a transcendent function. They act as bridges between the conscious mind and unconscious content, facilitating psychological integration and transformation. Jung also warned that modern society suffers from what he termed a symbolic deficit. In an age dominated by logic, science, and material concerns, symbolic thinking is often dismissed as irrelevant or irrational. This neglect has left many people disconnected from the inner resources needed to navigate emotional and spiritual challenges. The absence of meaningful symbols contributes to widespread feelings of emptiness, fragmentation, and psychological distress, a condition Jung believed to be at the heart of many contemporary crises. To remedy this, Jung advocated for a renewed relationship with the symbolic traditions found in myth and fairy tale. At the same time, he emphasized the importance of staying open to the appearance of new symbolic forms, those capable of speaking to the unique psychological demands of modern life. Applying this approach involves cultivating an awareness of archetypal patterns as they appear within one's own personal experience, and using those patterns as tools for introspection and self-development. For example, someone struggling with difficulties in a romantic relationship might find clarity by reflecting on stories that explore the dynamic of opposites, such as Beauty and the Beast. Likewise, a person facing career uncertainty could benefit from identifying with the structure of heroic quests, which often involve overcoming obstacles and discovering latent strengths. Crucially, Jung stressed that these tales are not to be interpreted literally. Rather, they are symbolic narratives that offer psychological guidance, serving as inner maps that help individuals navigate periods of challenge, transformation, and growth. Viewing one's own life through the lens of these archetypal stories allows for a broader understanding of personal struggle as part of a shared human experience. For Jung, the mythic and symbolic traditions of humanity carry enduring insights that can empower each individual on their unique journey toward self-realization and inner wholeness. In Part 31, titled Art, Creativity, and Mandala Symbolism, Carl Jung explores the deep psychological relevance of artistic creation, highlighting it as a vital channel for personal evolution and a unique way to express unconscious material that cannot be communicated through rational language. He recognized that the same psychic forces that produce dreams and neurotic symptoms are also the source of creative inspiration. However, unlike those other manifestations, artistic expression has the capacity to transform disturbing unconscious content into meaningful and accessible forms that can be integrated into conscious awareness. Jung distinguished between two fundamental types of artistic expression. The first, which he called psychological art, is rooted in the artist's personal life and reveals individual meanings. The second, visionary art, arises from archetypal dimensions within the collective unconscious and speaks to universal human experiences. Although he valued both, Jung was particularly fascinated by visionary art because of its ability to reveal shared inner processes and its potential to anticipate widespread cultural shifts. At the heart of Jung's inquiry into art and the psyche was the mandala, a circular symbol that came to represent his understanding of psychic wholeness and the archetype of the self. His engagement with mandalas began during a period of intense personal crisis following his break from Freud. During this time, Jung began instinctively drawing circular images without consciously knowing why. He soon discovered that this spontaneous act brought about a sense of psychological stability and helped unify the fragmented elements of his inner life. As he continued this work, Jung noted that mandala-like images were not unique to his own experience. They appeared across different religions, cultures, and artistic traditions, as well as in the spontaneous creations of individuals undergoing profound psychological change. This widespread recurrence convinced him that the mandala was an archetypal symbol, an innate organizational pattern that centers and stabilizes the psyche. Jung observed that people engaged in deep inner work often began producing mandala imagery on their own. The mandala's circular design functions as a symbolic vessel where opposing psychological elements can coexist in a balanced, harmonious arrangement rather than in destructive conflict. Typically, the center of the mandala contains symbols representing the self or a divine essence, while the outer areas hold a range of psychological elements arranged in meaningful symmetry around that central point. As such, creating mandalas can serve two important psychological functions. First, as a diagnostic tool that reveals the current condition of a person's inner life, and second, as a healing practice that promotes psychological integration and coherence. For Jung, art was far more than a skillful craft or a form of entertainment. It was a powerful psychological activity. He found that true creativity arises when the ego steps aside, allowing the unconscious mind to express itself through the artistic process. This conscious surrender to creative flow mirrors the essential relationship between the ego and the self in psychological development. In this context, making art becomes a form of inner training, a way to cultivate emotional equilibrium and deepen self-understanding. It also offers a secure space in which individuals can engage with intense or troubling aspects of the psyche, such as shadow material and archetypal energies, which might otherwise be too difficult to confront directly. Through the creative process, these elements can be slowly assimilated into conscious life. Jung stressed that the psychological value of artistic expression does not depend on technical skill or aesthetic refinement. Instead, its significance lies in the authenticity and emotional depth behind the work. Unplanned drawings, writings, or other forms of spontaneous expression that arise from a genuine internal necessity often carry greater psychological power than polished pieces lacking true inner engagement. Jung urged everyone, not just those who identify as artists, to embrace creative expression as a core part of their journey toward psychological wholeness. In his view, the urge to create is a basic, universal drive, a natural function of the human psyche that connects us with deeper sources of wisdom and healing that lie beyond the reach of logic. From this perspective, creativity is not a special gift reserved for a talented few, but a vital and accessible resource for inner transformation, available to anyone willing to trust and act upon their authentic creative impulses. Part 32. Neurosis, Psychosis, and Mental Health. Carl Jung's perspective on mental illness diverged sharply from traditional medical views. Rather than interpreting psychological symptoms as purely biological defects to be eliminated, Jung regarded them as significant expressions of internal conflict rooted in the unconscious mind. In his view, neurotic symptoms often served a compensatory function, attempting to re-establish inner equilibrium when conscious attitudes became too inflexible or when vital psychological needs were ignored or suppressed. Jung refrained from dismissing such symptoms as merely pathological. Instead, he saw them as essential communications from the unconscious, pointing to the need for psychological adjustment or transformation. This understanding shifted the therapeutic focus away from the suppression of symptoms and toward discovering the deeper meanings behind mental and emotional disturbances. To distinguish between neurosis and psychosis, Jung examined how individuals related to their unconscious contents and whether they could maintain the integrity of the ego. In neurotic conditions, the ego remains largely functional, though inner conflicts manifest as anxiety, depression, compulsive behaviors, or other distressing experiences. People suffering from neurosis are generally anchored in reality, yet they experience internal divisions, often torn between conscious intentions and unconscious impulses, or between opposing complexes within the psyche. Jung interpreted neurosis as a signal that the personality had fallen out of balance and that neglected, denied, or undeveloped aspects of the self needed to be reintegrated. This reintegration was essential, he believed, for attaining a more complete and genuine sense of self. In contrast, psychosis indicated a more severe disconnection between the ego and the unconscious. Here, unconscious, especially archetypal, contents could break into consciousness with such intensity that the ego's ability to function and make sense of reality became severely compromised. Yet, Jung did not view psychotic episodes as meaningless or simply the result of neurological failure. He was deeply interested in the symbolic and psychological dimensions of even the most bizarre or irrational experiences. Often, he found that psychotic phenomena were rich with archetypal and spiritual imagery, expressions of the psyche's attempt to confront fundamental questions of identity, purpose, and existence. In this light, mental breakdowns could be interpreted not just as illness, but as disoriented or incomplete efforts at inner transformation. For Jung, mental health was not defined by the absence of symptoms or by social conformity. Instead, it was rooted in psychological development, integration, and the capacity for inner change. He believed true well-being involved an ongoing dialogue between consciousness and the unconscious, allowing the individual to evolve through the assimilation of new experiences. This process required activating and balancing all four psychological functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition, while also engaging with the archetypal forces that bring depth and significance to life. He cautioned against becoming overly identified with one-sided psychological tendencies, even if they were socially acceptable, as such imbalance could lead to fragmentation and the emergence of symptoms. Jung's approach to therapy emphasized supporting the psyche's inherent drive toward balance and self-healing, rather than imposing external fixes or eliminating all discomfort. He maintained that many symptoms carried within them the seeds of their own resolution, and that the role of therapy was to help individuals engage meaningfully with their suffering rather than avoid it. This path, Jung noted, requires patience, dedication, and a deep respect for the wisdom embedded in psychological pain. What may initially seem irrational or harmful often discloses a purposeful and constructive dimension when met with careful attention and understanding. Jung's framework offers a hopeful vision for those struggling with mental health. It suggests that their suffering may be part of the psyche's attempt to grow, and that, with compassionate guidance, these challenges can become gateways to healing, transformation, and a more authentic self. Part 33. Projection, Transference, and Relationship Dynamics. Carl Jung's exploration of projection revealed one of the most profound ways in which the unconscious mind shapes both personal awareness and the dynamics of human relationships. Projection occurs when individuals unconsciously attribute their own hidden traits, unresolved inner struggles, or unrecognized potential to others, perceiving in them elements of themselves they cannot or will not consciously accept. This mechanism operates outside of conscious intention, causing people to misinterpret others as embodiments of their own internal experiences. Jung understood projection as serving two important functions. It protects the ego from difficult self-truths, and simultaneously, it opens the door to growth by making those disowned parts visible, albeit externally at first. Projections gain strength when the recipient bears some actual or imagined resemblance to the projected content. Jung described this phenomenon as a hook, a feature in the other person, whether real or perceived, that allows the projection to attach. For example, someone who has buried their aggressive tendencies might react strongly to minor assertiveness in another. Similarly, a person who has denied their creative gifts may experience envy or irritation when faced with someone who expresses artistic talent or originality. These reactions often feel justified and rational to the one projecting, making it exceedingly difficult to distinguish projection from objective perception. A helpful clue is the intensity of emotion involved. If a person's emotional response seems exaggerated in relation to the situation, projection may be at play. One of the most potent and complex expressions of projection is transference, which tends to emerge in emotionally charged relationships, especially in psychotherapy. In these settings, clients frequently assign symbolic or archetypal roles to their therapists, imagining them as parental figures, spiritual guides, or even as healers with extraordinary powers to rescue or transform. These projections often reflect unresolved emotional patterns rooted in early life experiences, reactivating old wounds and past relationship dynamics. Jung did not see this as an obstacle, but rather as a vital phase in the therapeutic journey, one where the client is given the opportunity to revisit and reprocess early psychological imprints within the safety of the therapeutic alliance. He warned against dismantling these projections too quickly through intellectual analysis alone. Instead, he encouraged working with them consciously, treating transference as a meaningful and necessary part of healing. Equally significant is countertransference, a concept Jung used to describe the therapist's own emotional reactions to the client. While traditionally viewed as a potential hindrance, Jung recognized these responses as valuable windows into both the therapist's psyche and the shared dynamics within the therapeutic relationship. Rather than dismiss or suppress these responses, Jung encouraged therapists to reflect on them mindfully and ethically. By doing so, therapists can gain deeper insights, not only into the client's unconscious material, but also into their own. This marked a significant shift from viewing therapists as detached authorities to acknowledging the reciprocal psychological influence that defines all genuine healing relationships. The process of identifying and withdrawing one's projections is essential for personal development and healthy relating. It involves learning to differentiate between what belongs to the self and what genuinely belongs to others. This journey requires accepting and integrating previously rejected aspects of the self, rather than attempting to fix or criticize those who seem to embody them. According to Jung, this often begins with disillusionment, the uncomfortable recognition that those we once placed on pedestals or demonized are not what we imagined them to be. Though unsettling, this realization clears the path for a deeper psychological task, to consciously reclaim and integrate the qualities we had unconsciously assigned to others. As this inner work unfolds, relationships take on greater depth and authenticity. Others are no longer viewed as carriers of our inner conflicts, but are seen and appreciated for who they genuinely are. Simultaneously, the individual undergoes real psychological growth by embracing parts of themselves that had long been denied or overlooked. Part 34. Eastern Philosophy's Influence on Jung. Carl Jung's exploration of Eastern philosophy and spirituality significantly shaped his views on consciousness, personal development, and the broader meaning of human existence. Beginning in the 1920s, he immersed himself in the teachings of Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and other Eastern traditions. Jung was struck by the striking similarities between the inner transformations described in these ancient systems and his own clinical understanding of individuation, the process by which a person strives for psychological wholeness. In contrast to many of his Western peers who often dismissed Eastern ideas as esoteric or overly mystical, Jung engaged with them seriously and respectfully. He recognized them not as foreign curiosities, but as rich psychological systems that could offer practical guidance for navigating the complexities of the human mind. These cross-cultural studies both reinforced his existing theories and expanded his perspective on the untapped dimensions of human consciousness. The Hindu notion of the self as the underlying reality beyond personal identity deeply resonated with Jung and provided a powerful parallel to his concept of the archetypal self. He observed meaningful similarities between the Hindu spiritual journey toward the realization of the true self and the psychological process he witnessed in therapy. Both emphasized transcending the ego to access a more expansive, universal awareness. However, Jung diverged from traditional Hinduism in one critical way. Rather than focusing solely on transcendence, he emphasized the importance of integrating unconscious material into conscious life. For Jung, true psychological evolution demanded engagement with experience, not detachment from it. Buddhist philosophy also played a key role in shaping Jung's understanding of psychological suffering and healing. Its core teaching, that suffering arises from attachment to fixed notions of self and reality, closely aligned with his own clinical observations about the roots of neurosis. Jung saw that much emotional distress stems from rigid self-concepts and the suppression of unconscious content. Buddhist practices of mindful and non-judgmental awareness influenced Jung's therapeutic style, encouraging a compassionate, observant approach to one's inner world. He was particularly drawn to the middle way, a foundational Buddhist ideal that avoids extremes and promotes balance. This idea harmonized with his belief in reconciling opposing forces within the psyche rather than privileging one over the other. Taoism offered yet another deep reservoir of insight, particularly in its understanding of psychic energy and the natural flow of life. The principle of Wu Wei, or action in harmony with nature's rhythms, mirrored Jung's conviction that psychological processes should unfold organically, not be forced or controlled. The Taoist symbol of yin and yang, depicting the dynamic interaction of opposing yet complementary forces, profoundly shaped Jung's vision of personal transformation. He understood growth not as the triumph of one element over another, but as a synthesis achieved through integration. Taoism's respect for natural timing and life's cyclical nature also influenced Jung's therapeutic methods, reminding him that meaningful change often depends on waiting for the right moment. Jung was especially moved by the Taoist ideal of the sage, an individual who lives in attunement with the natural order, not as a model of perfection or authority, but as an embodiment of wisdom, adaptability, and sensitivity to the deeper currents of life. For Jung, this image captured the essence of psychological maturity, living with presence, balance, and an openness to inner and outer realities alike. Although Jung held Eastern traditions in high esteem, he was careful to caution Westerners against adopting these spiritual systems indiscriminately. He warned that transplanting Eastern practices into a Western psyche without proper psychological preparation could lead to what he called psychic inflation, the premature identification with spiritual ideals that bypasses the difficult inner work necessary for real growth. Such superficial adoption, he argued, could provide temporary solace while leaving fundamental personal issues unresolved. In Jung's view, authentic transformation requires confronting one's own unconscious material, including the shadow aspects of the self, and fully grappling with the influence of one's cultural conditioning. Escaping into foreign spiritual frameworks, however appealing, could never substitute for the courageous and often uncomfortable process of self-examination and integration. Through his synthesis of Eastern wisdom and Western psychological thought, Jung forged a unique and comprehensive approach to inner development. His method honored both empirical inquiry and contemplative insight, remaining rooted in therapeutic reality while opening space for expanded consciousness and deeper self-awareness. Part 35. Cultural Psychology, Social Dynamics, and Collective Behavior. Carl Jung's inquiry into the structure of the human psyche naturally evolved to encompass not just individual psychology, but the broader psychological patterns that govern social groups, cultures, and collective actions. He suggested that the same archetypal forces shaping personal growth also operate on communal and cultural scales, manifesting in shared myths, societal norms, and coordinated behaviors that underpin group identities and collective movements. Jung posited that societies function much like individuals, with both a conscious aspect, expressed in visible values and ideals, and an unconscious dimension he termed the collective shadow. To truly understand the roots of cultural tensions, political turmoil, and shifts in societal identity, one must look beyond surface events and consider these underlying psychological structures at the group level. His work in collective psychology provided a framework for linking individual mental well-being with the psychological health of entire communities and cultural systems. The concept of the collective shadow sheds light on broad social phenomena such as discrimination, scapegoating, and intergroup conflict. Just as individuals tend to repress and project unwanted parts of themselves onto others, entire societies can externalize their denied characteristics onto marginalized groups, be they ethnic, religious, ideological, or national. This mechanism of projection allows a group to maintain a favorable self-image by displacing all negativity onto an external other, who becomes the symbolic antagonist. Jung observed that such projections often intensify during times of uncertainty or upheaval, when populations become especially receptive to simplified explanations for complex problems, and are eager to identify concrete targets for their fears and frustrations. In examining mass psychology and political movements, Jung demonstrated how archetypal forces could be awakened on a large scale, sometimes consciously manipulated. Influential political figures often rise to power by embodying archetypal roles such as the protective patriarch, noble hero, or wise sage. These figures tap into deep-seated psychological needs and unconscious fantasies, enabling leaders to stir powerful collective emotions and bypass individual rationality. Jung's analysis of the Nazi rise to power in Germany served as a striking case study of how collective psychological regression can occur when archetypal energies overwhelm conscious reasoning. He introduced the concept of participation mystique, a condition in which individuals become so entangled in the group psyche that their personal identity and autonomy dissolve, resulting in a shared psychological state. This phenomenon can have dual outcomes. It may foster unity, creativity, and a sense of common purpose, or it can suppress individuality and ethical responsibility, enabling mob mentalities and large-scale destructive behavior. Jung warned that when individuals overly identify with the collective, they risk relinquishing their own moral compass and capacity for critical thought, allowing group ideologies and emotional contagion to overtake their inner lives. Though collective identification can lead to cohesive and effective social structures, it also harbors the potential for peril, particularly when it is driven by unconscious projections or archetypal forces gone unchecked. The study of participation mystique reveals both the generative power and the latent danger embedded in human group dynamics. According to Jung, just as personal growth requires confronting and integrating the individual shadow, cultural evolution demands a similar reckoning with the collective shadow. Societies must confront the aspects of themselves they prefer to ignore or deny, rather than projecting those qualities onto outsiders. Additionally, mature cultures must cultivate a tolerance for ambiguity and complexity, resisting the appeal of reductive narratives and binary thinking in the face of intricate social issues. Cultural development, Jung believed, relies heavily on the emergence of psychologically integrated individuals, people who retain self-awareness and discernment even in the midst of collective pressure. These individuals play a vital role in ensuring that collective engagement remains grounded and does not descend into blind allegiance or mass irrationality. Ultimately, Jung viewed cultural progress as dependent on the rise of such conscious individuals, those who have confronted their own inner darkness and forged a stable, authentic identity. It is these people who are best equipped to navigate the psychological intricacies of collective existence, helping their communities avoid the dangers of archetypal domination and unconscious